It had been one of the better Christmases Kai had experienced since coming to Gulf City. There was the annual Yule party at Marie Beaumare's, and then the Christmas party that GCL&M had thrown for the artists and their families. The quiet Christmas Eve that he and Chastel had spent cuddling on the sofa in the den watching ships pass by out in the Gulf. And finally this one spent with Chastel's family. He felt like he had a family again, and that felt good. Dinner had been eaten, gifts exchanged, and the dishes had been cleaned and put away. Chastel was sitting with her mother, their heads close together as they planned out yet another milestone in her pregnancy. Chastel had frequently complained that most other women weren't as large as she was at 16 weeks, and her mother reminded her that most other women weren't carrying triplets. Kai and Bob were sitting with Ryan on the back deck of the Lee home drinking coffee and talking about their plans for the coming year. "I start my field work now," Ryan was saying. "Now it's time to get out of the classroom and actually start practicing what they've been teaching me for the last 4 years. Have you decided on where you want to work yet?" Kai asked him. "I'm going to try and get on at one of the parks around here for a while," he said. "That's a bit of a surprise," Kai told him. "I figured you'd want to go to one of the larger forests. Best to start small and build up from there." "Something tells me that I should stick around her for a while." Kai nodded and said, "You understand wildlife management and forestry far better than I do. It's not hard. It's just the birds and the bees, and the flowers and the trees." He paused for a moment and then added, "And of course the wolves." Kai laughed. "That's one way to put it. To be honest, I'll be glad when I'm done with this project so I can move on to something else." "How is that big project coming along?" Bob asked. "Everything on our end will be wrapped up by the 15th of next month. Then it goes to the director. We already had the dialogue to work with, so getting the voices to sync up shouldn't be an issue. I'd say it'll hit the theaters in time for the Christmas market next year. Nothing like this has ever been done before." "Well, you can be proud that you had a hand in it," Ryan told him. "I've watched you work your butt off for 3 years. I'm glad to see you getting something out of it." "I've gotten a lot out of it, Ryan. To the point that I'm probably going to stick with GCL&M for a few more projects and then branch out into my own company. I've got a few stories I want to tell too." "Good for you," Bob told him. "I've got a question for you, Bob, if you don't mind talking about it." Both Ryan and Bob gave him their complete attention. "Ryan and Chastel both have commented occasionally that you met Cassandra when she turned you into a hound of the hunt. Just what was that story?" Bob laughed and looked over at Ryan, then back to Kai. "Okay, you're family now, so we can tell this. Do you know where Chastel's name comes from?" Kai shook his head. "No. I know it's French, and it's somehow tied to werewolves, but that's all I know." "Well, Cassie's mother's maiden name is Chastel. The Chastels are blue bloods among werewolves. They trace their line back to the Beast of Gavaudan, and they only marry other blue blood werewolves and keep their line as pure as possible. They go as far as killing any family member that dares to have a child not approved by them. They kill the child too." "Okay, you've got my attention. And of course, as you are finding out now, multiple births are common in lycanthropes. Macy had a twin sister, Louv. Macy married an Irishman by the name of Ian Whalen. Ian wasn't just any Irishman either. He was a very powerful druid. Hence his brother officiated our wedding?" "Exactly. Well, when Cassie came along, that was more than the family could bear. They killed Ian and tried to kill Cassie. But Macy was a bit smarter than they were. She timed her escape from France down to the last second. By the time Louv figured out that Macy was making a run for it, she and Cassie were already on a Concorde to New York. From what I've heard, the plan was brilliant, and there wasn't a minute to spare." "So, Macy and Cassie came to the U.S.? "Yeah. First they settled in Salem, where Cassie got training in every kind of real magic Macy could find. While there, she met the uncle of my best friend, Lance. They fell in love and got married and moved to Gulf City. What they didn't know was that Louv was hot on their tails, and this time had help with an organization called the Academy." Kai nodded his head and said, "Hunter has told me about them. You haven't heard half of it. Remind me someday to tell you about how my dad died." Kai could see the hurt and anger still in his eyes. He took a deep breath, sighed, and continued. "Lance was just coming into his witcheries. He spent about 4 years of pure hell and back fighting just about anything that the Academy could throw at him. Lance managed to keep us all alive when my dad was killed. He got all of us kids out of those, would safely save one. He still beats himself up today for not saving her too." "Romantically involved?" Bob shook his head. "No. Lance just has very strong caretaker instincts, and it sometimes leads him to trouble. Well, anyway, 2 of the other members of our football team were on that trip with us. We'd started noticing how Lance was stronger, smarter, faster, more perceptive, and sometimes downright meaner than any of the rest of us. We pulled him aside after the final game of the season and told him what we suspected and that we'd have his back if there was trouble. He wasn't happy about that. He was afraid we were going to get hurt. Okay, Kai said. Makes sense. Lance's dad. You never met his dad. He was the most down-to-earth man you'd ever meet and would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. He died just before you came to Gulf City. Anyway, his dad used to have these pickings at his place. Basically, a lot of local musical talent would get together a couple of weekends out of the month, bring their family, have a bonfire, and sit around picking out and singing old country and gospel songs. We got invited to one where we met Cassie. What we didn't know was that Louv had tracked Cassandra and Macy to Lance's place and was preparing to slaughter everyone there. What happened? Lance saw Louv stalking the party. He got a few of us in the know to get the kids and as many people as we could up on the deck at his dad's house. Bob shook his head. Lance's dad's house was that big house up high on cement blocks down from the plantation. It's a solid concrete house with steel-reinforced doors and shutters to resist storm surge. Anyway, when Louv attacked, Lance got in the way, and then so did Macy. By the time Macy was involved, we couldn't tell which werewolf was which. You've seen how much Cassie and Chasdell look alike in their battle form. Yeah. Well, Macy and Louv were identical twins. But Cassie had an ace up her sleeve nobody knew about. She'd been studying some pretty elemental magic. She called up Hearn's Wild Hunt, turned me, and 3 of my buddies, Paul, Pete, and Tom, along with the McKnight's dog, Brandy, into the hounds and dropped Hearn's spirit on Lance. We chased that werewolf up across Gulf City, across the bay, down the mobile side of the bay and out onto Dauphin Island before we finally caught her just before sunrise. What happened then? Bob shook his head at a painful memory. Let's just say that there's more than one way to kill a werewolf. Fangs and claws are just as effective as silver. It's not something I like to talk about. When the deed was done and the sun was up, we were back at the McKnight's place, and Lance lit into Cassie like a windmill in a tornado. He made it clear in no uncertain terms that she was never to cast another spell on him or his friends without our express permission. Why was he so upset? Because the hounds stayed with us, and according to him, Hearn tried to take up permanent residence in his skull. I could see where that might be a problem, Kai said, shaking his head. Looking up at the sky, he added. There's a whole world out there that most people don't even know about. There's the everyday mundane world with our 9-to-5 jobs and our bills to pay, and babies to change. And then there's a world where creatures really do go bump in the night. Bob smiled and said, I'll have you know I haven't walked into a single piece of furniture or a wall since I became a hound. Kai just raised his coffee cup and said, Merry Christmas. See, the hunters hunted, the hounds of the hunt for these events. The call was from his mother-in-law. So Sebastian stepped aside in the newsroom and took it. He was 10 minutes away from the end of the broadcast anyway, so his assistant could handle it. What's up, Bernice? Why didn't you tell us that Chelsea was pregnant again? Why did I have to find out from Ruth's Facebook page? What? Sebastian asked. Chelsea's not pregnant, at least not as far as I know. The video of the ultrasound is right here on Ruth's news feed. It says Darrow 16 weeks. What? Sebastian protested. There has to be some kind of mistake. There's no way she would keep something like that from me. Go to Ruth's page and look for yourself. Sebastian stepped into his office and called up his Facebook feed, and then navigated over to his mother's page. Sure enough, there was a video. It was dated just before Christmas, and the name on the chart was Sage Darrow. I don't know, he told Bernice. I guess I'll have to talk to Chelsea when I get home. I can't imagine why she'd keep something like this from me. Then, he noticed the number of little bodies in the video. What the hell? Triplets? See? Why would she keep this from me? Ruth asked. Better question is, why would she keep this from me? Sebastian told her. It seems like the father would find out first. He grabbed his coat and briefcase and headed over to where his assistant was wrapping up the 6 o'clock news show. Felicia Meadows was a heavy-set woman in her mid-40s. She had scrambled all the way up from human interest reporter to assistant producer, and Bastian suspected that she wasn't going to stop at his job. That's another one in the can, Bossman. He nodded and said, It looks good, Felicia. Can you wrap this up? I've got a family emergency. Yeah. Nothing serious, I hope. Bastian chuckled and said, Either there's some kind of mix-up, or I'm about to be a father again. Which would you prefer? At this point, I'm not sure. The ultrasound I saw said triplets. Wow. You're not kidding. She smiled and added, Go on, Daddy. We got this. Thanks, Felicia. I owe you one. You owe me 3, but who's counting? She told him as he pulled on his jacket and headed out the door. This was going to take some serious explaining. 7:30 traffic from Huntington to Worthington wasn't bad. He crossed the bridge into Chesapeake, Ohio, and then down 52 to the Ohio University Southern Campus, and took the back road to downtown Ironton, and then across the bridge to Belafonte Street in Russell. It was nearly a straight shot from there to home, with only 2 turns left. Pulling into the driveway, he saw Chelsea unloading her Corolla. She smiled at him, kissed him and said, "If you'll get the rest of the groceries, I'll get Tabitha." "Sure," he said, grabbing a handful of plastic bags from the back floorboard, while she unstrapped their daughter from her car seat. Before he could react, Bastian had an armload of 3-year-old. "Daddy," Tabitha squealed, and Bastian very nearly fell backwards onto the concrete drive. "Tabitha," he called her name with a smile. "Why don't you take Mommy inside, and I'll bring in the food?" "'Kay," she said as she climbed down out of the car and grabbed her mother's hand. 10 minutes later, Tabitha was playing in the living room while Chelsea and Sebastian put away the groceries. "Where'd you go today?" he asked her nonchalantly. "I told you this morning I had a doctor's appointment. I stopped to get groceries, and after I picked up Tabitha from your mother's, I came straight home." "Why? Do you have something you want to tell me?" Not if it's what that question usually means when one spouse asks it of another. He stopped and thought about what she said. Then it hit him. "No, I don't mean it that way. I mean, something the doctor said." "Yeah," she said. "I'm pregnant. I'm a little hurt that you told my mother before you told me." "What are you talking about?" "I didn't tell your mother. She's got it all over her Facebook page. There's an ultrasound of the babies and everything." Bastian, there hasn't been an ultrasound yet." "Sure, there has. Where else would Mom have gotten it?" "Not from me," she said. "We're not going to schedule an ultrasound until I'm at 6 weeks. Dr. Park thinks I'm only about 4 weeks now. I just took a blood test this afternoon. The ultrasound on Mom's page says that you're 16 weeks. "What ultrasound?" "The one on Mom's Facebook page. I saw it myself. It said Darrow, 16 weeks, and triplets." "Triplets? I don't think so. I hope not." She got up and headed over to the family computer on a low countertop. Firing it up, she logged on and navigated to his mother's Facebook page. Sure enough, there was a video of an ultrasound for Darrow and showed 3 little babies at 16 weeks. "I don't know who this is, but it's not me." "It has your name," he said. She studied the video for a few minutes. Then with a slap of her hand on the counter, she said, "Not my ultrasound, Mr. Bigshot News Director. Look at the hospital." He leaned over and read, "Gulf City Memorial? Who do we know in Gulf City?" "I don't know. Call your mother and ask her who it belongs to." He pulled his phone out of his pocket and dialed her number. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Hey son." "Mom, whose ultrasound did you post on your Facebook page?" There was a long silence. "Oops. You weren't supposed to see that." "Mother?" he asked seriously. She sighed and said, "It's Chastel's." "Who is Chastel Darrow?" "Again," she sighed. "Your sister-in-law." "When did Shannon get married?" "Nobody told me." "Not Shannon, Rain." Then it hit him. He sat back onto one of the stools at the kitchen bar and tried to collect his thoughts. "When did you talk to him?" "Shannon, Melissa, and I have been talking to his wife, Chastel. Rain still won't talk to us." "I see," he said. "I'll talk to you later." "Thanks, Mom." He hung up the phone, his mind still trying to comprehend just what had been said. Rain had gotten married. His wife was expecting triplets. Finally, he looked over at Chelsea and said, "Not your ultrasound." "No shit. Who's it?" she asked, with her hands on her hips. "Chastel's." "Who is Chastel?" she demanded. "Rain's wife." "Oh," she said with her mouth forming a tight ring. He could see the emotions wash over her. And just for a moment he saw the one emotion he'd hoped he would never see. Regret. Not regret for what they, had done, but regret for what it had cost her. Then she nodded and turned back toward the kitchen. "How does a couple of those venison steaks you brought home sound?" He simply stood there as she pulled the steaks out of the fridge where they'd been soaking in vinegar and water to get rid of the gamey taste. He nodded and replied, "Sounds good. Well, it should be ready in about 40 minutes. Why don't you give Tabitha her bath while I fix dinner?" "Sure," he said, watching her back, realizing that no matter how she was acting, she was hurting. He went into the bathroom and set the tub and started running water. Then he came back to the living room and scooped his daughter up and got her undressed and ready to bathe. He kept watching Chelsea from the corner of his eye to see if she was crying. So far, no. After the bath and dinner and Tabitha had been put to bed, he sat down on the sofa with Chelsea and asked, "How are you feeling?" "Fine," she said. It was a tone that every man still alive knew meant that she wasn't fine. After a few moments he said, "I guess it was bound to happen. Did we really expect him to crawl off into a hole somewhere and die?" "I think at first, he did," she replied. "When I went and visited him that night in the hospital, I think that was what he was thinking. It scared me." "But he didn't," Bastian said. "He picked himself up and went on with his life." He found himself someone new, fell in love, and got married. Did your mother say how long he's been communicating with her? She said he wasn't. She said that his wife, Chastel, was. What kind of name is Chastel? Chelsea asked bitterly. French, I think. Oh, she said again. So they're living in Gulf City? I guess so. Mom didn't tell me much. Only that she, Shannon, and Melissa have been talking to his wife. Before she could say anything else, the doorbell rang. I'll see who it is. He got up and strode to the front door to see the bundled-up forms of Shannon and Melissa stomping the snow off their feet on the porch. Opening it, he said, What brings you two out this late? Can we come in? Melissa asked. Bastian nodded and said, Come on in. Get warm. Dang, it's cold out there. Weatherman says it's going down to the single digits tonight. Make sure Mom leaves the sinks dripping. Will do, Melissa said as she peeled off her muffler and coat. Just hang them on the rack there. They'll dry better, and there's a vent there to keep them warm. Thanks, Shannon said as the two entered the living room. Evening, Chelsea. Shannon. Mom said she told you about Kai and Chastel. Kai? Bastian asked. Well, sit down. He gestured toward the love seat and a wingback chair. Melissa nodded her head. Thanks. Yeah, Kai. Evidently when Rain left, he started going by his middle name. I guess I could understand that, Chelsea said. How long have you guys been talking to her? July or August, I guess. Right after they got married. How did you know when he got married? Bastian asked. I came across a newspaper announcement of their wedding in the Gulf City paper. Melissa told him. What were you doing reading the Gulf City newspaper? Nothing. I had my search engine set to scan every so often for Rain's name. It finally popped up when they announced his wedding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. Dad said it was best if I didn't mention this to you guys, so I held on to it. Bastian nodded his head. He understood what his dad was trying to do. He took the paper and looked at it. It looked like Rain had put on a few pounds of hard muscle. He did look kind of funny in a kilt, though. Then he noticed the bride. She wasn't just pretty, she was stunning, and she had an air about her of sophistication and elegance. He raised an eyebrow at it and then hesitantly passed it to his wife. There was that look again. What could have been but wasn't. It nearly tore out Bastian's heart to see her trace his face with her fingertips. He looks like he's doing well. Bastian saw Melissa about to say something, but Shannon put a hand on hers and she stopped. Chelsea noted, they didn't waste any time starting a family. Melissa replied, No. Chastel said they wanted to have their kids before she settled into a nursing job. She's a nurse? Bastian asked. Yeah, Melissa told him. He works for Gulf City Light and Magic as the lead computer animation artist on a major motion picture that is supposed to be out later this year. Which one? Bastian asked. Shannon shook his head and said, Chastel hasn't shared that with us. But evidently, he's good enough that the director paid for their French Alps honeymoon. Are you guys okay with this? Melissa asked. Okay with what? Chelsea asked. With Rain getting married? I'm glad for him. I hope he's found someone who loves him the way he deserves to be loved. Melissa turned to Bastian, who said, Honestly, I don't know how I feel. I feel relief that he's doing okay. Well, even. I'm feeling sad, angry, and frustrated with myself that I hurt my brother so badly that he won't even talk to our mother or our other siblings. I feel awful that he had nobody to stand beside him at his wedding. Not quite, Shannon said. Evidently Chastel's brother and this guy, Hunter Dare, stood with him. I'm not saying that I don't wish it would have been me, but at least he had someone to stand with him. Yeah, but not family, Bastian told him. I don't think that's ever going to be on the table, Bastian, Melissa said. I'm not trying to be hurtful here, just honest. Kai, or Rain, or whatever he's going by, may eventually open up enough to talk to Mom, Shannon, and myself, but I think it would take something momentous for him to talk to Dad. I'm not sure he'd talk to you to save his life. She shook her head and added, and again, I'm not trying to be hurtful, just honest. Then how do you think we should handle this news? Chelsea asked. Ignore it, Melissa told her. It doesn't concern you. Has Chastel asked about Tabitha? Melissa shook her head. No, but I told her about her just the same. Chelsea smiled at that. I'm glad that he seems to be happy. Chastel seems to think so. I know she's told me how deliriously happy she is with him. They share a lot of the same goals in life. They have a nice home on British Bay. She says that they like to go for hikes in the woods, at least once a month, but that's fallen off since she got pregnant. They're trying to figure out how to set up the nursery. Have they picked any names yet? I think that they're going with Hunter for a boy, and she mentioned Opal for a girl. But they haven't decided on anything definite yet. Shannon looked back and forth between Bastian and Chelsea. Look, are you guys going to be okay with this news? Why wouldn't we? Sebastian told him. I'm glad my brother has a new life and is doing well. I understand why he doesn't want to talk to me. Hell, there are times I don't even want to talk to me. We just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Everything is just fine, Chelsea said. Again, there was a twinge in her voice that made Sebastian believe the opposite. Well, in that case, we need to get going. I have to be back at school by 10 in the morning for class. Go, Sebastian told him. Get some rest. That's a long drive and 6 o'clock will come awful early. Don't I know it? Shannon told him. I'll call you tomorrow, Melissa told Chelsea. Thanks, Chelsea said. And you guys drive safe, both this evening and tomorrow. Melissa came over and gave both of them a hug before departing. Sebastian saw them to the door and thanked them for coming over. He really was touched that both his siblings had forgiven them enough for that. After they'd gone, Sebastian took a deep breath and went back to his wife. He could tell she was still bothered by the news. He took her hand in his and asked, "Tell me what you were thinking?" He saw a look in her eye that bothered him. "I don't know. I'm a bit ashamed, I guess." That caught Bastian off guard. Why? I guess that as long as I didn't know how Rain was doing, I could just assume that he was still hurting, that he still loved us, but was too hurt to contact us. This is sort of a gut punch. He's over us. He has moved on and built a fantastic life for himself. I'm ashamed that I wanted him to keep hurting forever. Why? Bastian asked the question that he knew he had to have an answer to, even if he hated it. She squeezed his hand and said, "You're not going to like an honest answer. I still want one." She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. "I love you dearly, but you have to know that I never stopped loving Rain. I was forced to choose between the two of you, and I chose you. But sometimes, deep in my heart, I wondered if something ever happened to you, if Rain would take me back." She nodded toward the computer. This answers that question, and it's a brutal reminder of just how selfish I can be. "So do you still choose me?" Bastian asked, nearly whining. "I'm still here," she said. "I'm not going away. I still love you. You're still the one I chose. It's just this has brought up some old feelings. Maybe Rain had the right idea. Maybe it is best not to talk to each other. We, both you and me, betrayed him. Probably me far more than you. I don't think there are really any distinctions with this kind of betrayal. Our marriage was born in blood and pain, but we've managed so far. Better than most. I still love you, no matter what. And you're still the one I chose," she replied. "I still love you, and I know I have to let these last remnants of what I once felt for Rain go." "I can't do that," Bastian said. "He's my brother, and I will always love him, even if I hurt him. That's a hard thing to reconcile." "I know," she said. March 2009. Chastel looked at the email and sighed. It was the one thing she worried about the most with being in contact with Kai's family. She was walking a razor's edge trying to keep his mom and two younger sibs informed about their family, without giving too much information to family members that he wanted nothing to do with. He was still no contact with anyone in the family, but had no problem with her starting a relationship with anyone in it. He didn't tell her not to talk to Sebastian and Chelsea, but she knew he would be hurt if she did. She was trying to respect her husband's boundaries while still finding out what kind of family managed to produce the man she loved. "Honey," she called from the breakfast bar in the kitchen. "Yeah?" He replied from where he was watching the March Elite 8 battle it out toward the Final Four. "Would you come here?" "Sure," he said, getting up from the sofa and turning off the television. "Gotta be better than watching two teams slug it out where I want both of them to lose." "Maybe not," she said. "What's up?" He came up behind her, kissed her on top of the head and hugged her. Then looking over her shoulder, he said, "Oh, what do you want me to do with it?" "I haven't opened it yet." "That's up to you, babe," he told her. "I don't want to talk to her. The subject line says congratulations. Honey, if you want to read it, go ahead. If you want to answer it, go ahead. I just don't want to know about it." He glanced at the television with disgust and then turned toward the kitchen. "I'm going to fix a pot of coffee. Do you want some?" "Sure," she told him, studying the screen trying to decide. "Go ahead," he told her. "Go ahead." "What?" "Go ahead and read the email. It's not going to hurt me. I'm past being hurt by them. I don't even hate them. I'm just uninterested in anything to do with them." She got up and waddled over to where he was measuring out the coffee and hugged him from behind. It was a major feat, considering her size carrying triplets. "I love you, Kaidero." He patted her hand and told her, "And I love you. Don't ever think that I don't. It's just that talking about your family makes you uncomfortable." He shook his head and turned around. "Not all of them. I have no problem with hearing about Mom, Melissa, or Shannon. I just don't care to hear about the rest." He smiled and said, "I was even going to suggest that you invite Melissa and Shannon, and maybe even Mom, for a couple of weeks after the babies are born. It's probably time I started talking to some of my family again." "Really?" she asked in surprise. "Really?" he told her. If this goes well, I think we should ask your mom to move into the mother-in-law suite. Really? He asked. She's mentioned the cold up there is starting to get to her in the winter. That might be a good idea. We can talk about it more later. It's kind of jumping in feet first, but it's a possibility. I definitely want to start talking to Mom, Shannon, and Melissa again. I miss them. I love you and your family dearly, but I miss my own. I can understand that, she told him. I'll send them an email. Then she smiled and said, You're good people. You know that? Nah, I'm just very indulgent to my wife whom I love with all my heart. He grinned at her. Good thing, since you're stuck with us, she told him. Us? Me and the babies. He chuckled and told her, Go ahead. Read the email. If you want to answer it, I won't be upset. I'm not going to try and tell you who in my family you can be friends with. I just don't want to hurt you any more than you already have been. He stopped and looked at her saying, I've already told you what the only deal breaker in our marriage would be, and you agreed it was for you too. I trust you to do the right thing and to have my back, and I've got yours. Your concern right now is proof that you have my back. That's all I can ask. She stepped up close to him, forced his head around to look her in the eye, and said, That will never happen. I've seen how much this has hurt you. I would never hurt you like that. Then she kissed him. He just nodded and smiled wanly. And I've got yours. I know what cheating does to someone, and I would never disrespect you that way. I love you far too much for that. If I'm feeling like I have a need you're not meeting, I'll bring it to you. I won't go looking outside the marriage. She chuckled and said, Listen to us. We've only been married a few months, and we're talking about how to keep the relationship going. It's good to understand these things, he told her. Now, I'll fix you a cup of coffee. You go back to your email. Chastel smiled and returned to the laptop on the counter. Finally, throwing caution to the wind, she clicked on the email and read it. Dear Chastel, I'm sure I'm the last person in the world that you wanted to hear from, but here I am. Let me start by saying congratulations on your wedding and on your impending blessing. Please understand that neither Sebastian nor I are trying to in any way hurt Rain, Kai, any more than we have already done. That is the last thing we would ever want to do. We understand just how badly we hurt him and we own that. We aren't looking for forgiveness, because I don't think what we did is even forgivable. That being said, I just wanted to let you know that we saw the ultrasound video on Ruth's Facebook page and that we are happy for you. Melissa and Shannon shared the newspaper clipping of your wedding with us last night. Again, congratulations. You have one of the best men at your side that any woman would want. Please keep him close to your heart. Chelsea Borden-Darrow. I don't think I need you to give me instructions on how to treat my husband, she said softly to herself. What, dear? Kai asked from the refrigerator where he was getting the creamer for coffee. Just talking to myself. She saved the message for consideration later. What are your plans for the rest of the day? I don't really have any. Well, I've got an idea, she told him as she was unbuttoning her blouse while she walked over to him before kissing him soundly. What about your coffee? He asked between kisses. I'll drink it later, she told him, as she pulled him toward the stairs. You intrigue me, Mrs. Darrow. Good, she replied. Every woman should be a mystery to the man she loves. May 2009. Shannon thought the picture was nearly perfect. Chastel and Kai were resting in twin rocking chairs. Chastel was holding two of their infants, while Kai held the third, which based on the blanket color was the boy. Under it was a caption. We are pleased to announce the birth of Opal, Jamie, and Hunter Darrow into our family. On the back of it, in what he assumed was Chastel's neat tight script, was a message that nearly sent his soul soaring. Kai wants to know if you, Melissa, and your mom want to come down in June and visit. We'll even send the plane tickets. He also found that with his further contact with Kai's family, the easier he found it to get past what Sebastian and Chelsea had done. It was as if reaching out to his wounded brother also acted as a salve on his relationship with Sebastian. What you got there? His dad asked as he came down the stairs into the foyer. Shannon stopped and grinned at him and said, Nieces and nephew. What are you talking about, Shannon? Shannon shrugged and handed him the card. He watched his dad study the card and then the message on the back. Then looking at the picture again, he smiled and asked, When did this happen? There's a whole series of events there. Which particular one? Let's start with why you didn't tell me that Rain's wife was expecting triplets at that? Back around Christmas. Chastel sent us an ultrasound video of the triplets. And you didn't tell me why? If I remember correctly, you told Melissa and I to drop it, so as not to hurt Sebastian and Chelsea. Boy, I ought to wring your neck, his dad growled at him. You don't not tell me about something this important. What part about it is important, Dad? Grandbabies, he said, a smile threatening his dark mood. What's this about you three going to visit them next month? Just that. We've been talking to Chastel for about 5 months now. Not Rain. He goes by Kai. Now, Dad. His father turned the information over in his mind and nodded before saying, Not Kai then? Not yet, Shannon told him. Chastel says that he's very wary about contact with family. But evidently, he's changed his mind because he wants us to come down and see the kids and meet his wife. And the reason I didn't get an invite? Probably because you've been so busy trying to make sure that Sebastian and Chelsea don't get hurt by something Kai does that you've kept them at bay. Like you said, you've sacrificed one son's happiness for your eldest's. As they walked into the den, his dad shook his head and said, That's not fair. Ray. Kai could have communicated anytime he wanted. And evidently, he doesn't want to. Shannon told him. Holding up the card, his father told him, I want a copy of this photo. Not a problem. What's not a problem? Grace asked, coming into the den. Getting Dad a copy of the photo of Kai, his wife, and kids. Kai's wife and kids? Grace asked. Who's Kai? My brother. You know the one you said got what he deserved with the butt kicking from Sebastian. Shannon might be willing to take rough off his dad over the way things had turned out, but Grace was a completely different story. If you can't take the heat, you need to stay out of the kitchen, she told him, her tone accusatory and settled. If Rain hadn't attacked a much larger man, he wouldn't have gotten hurt. If he hadn't been gone from Chelsea for so long, then she wouldn't have felt the need to look for comfort in the man who was there. And that's why you didn't get an invitation, Dad, Shannon said, taking the card. Where are you going? Grace asked. To get Dad a copy of the picture of his 3 new grandbabies. 3? Grace asked. Triplets. 2 girls and a boy. Opal, Jamie, and Hunter. He turned and headed back upstairs to his computer and printer. He could hear the argument getting geared up. He actually took a bit of sadistic glee from the fact that they were arguing. For a woman on the downside of 50, Grace sure had a lot of growing up to do. He popped the card into the scanner and dropped a piece of photo paper in the printer and set it to copying. When he was done, he left the copy on the table in the foyer and headed out. He wanted to be as far away from the argument that was building as he could get. His dad was starting to figure out just how much his affair with Grace had cost him in the long run. Late June 2009. Kai stood nervously in the airport watching for his mother and Sibs. He was taking a big chance here. He was reaching out to people who knew what had happened. Looking them in the eye was going to be difficult, but it was something he was going to have to do. Hunter had gone out of his way to help him come to grips with his past without ever asking what it was. He was the one that suggested this visit might be a good idea. It would at least let his mother get to know her grandkids. He wasn't sure how things were with his dad, and unless his dad reached out, he wasn't going to explore that. Chastel had some contact with Chelsea, but it was usually terse and left her in a bad mood. In the distance, he caught sight of Shannon's tall, lanky form walking ahead higher than just about anybody else in the terminal. Damn, he'd had a growth spurt. Next to him were Melissa, who had turned into a beautiful woman all her own, and their mother. The last sight caught in his throat. His mother was not looking well. She looked tired and worn out, and had aged far more than he would have expected in just 4 years. He felt a pang of guilt about that, and wondered how much his absence had contributed to it. He smiled and waved until he got Shannon's attention. Kai felt a knot form in the pit of his stomach and began to rise. Then Shannon waved back and turned the 2 women in his direction. Spying him, Melissa broke ranks and sprinted across the concourse and literally threw herself into his arms. Rain. She squealed through tightly closed lids that still managed to leak tears. With an armful of sister, it was all Kai could do to keep his balance as she nearly sobbed into his shoulder. Melissa, he said softly, stroking her back. I've missed you so much, she told him. Me too, he replied, still holding her tight. Then, just as quickly, they were joined by his mother and even Shannon. He didn't know how long they stood there hugging and tears flowing. Finally, he broke free and greeted each of them, surprised when the knot stuck in his throat. I've missed all of you too. Melissa pushed back from him and said, Then why wouldn't you talk to us? Through a haze of tears, he told her, because it hurt too much. She just nodded and hugged him again, before making way for his mother. He didn't know who he was getting the most comfort, him or his mom, but it was a good feeling, one that he hadn't felt in a long time. Then Shannon pulled him into a hug too. When they were done, he looked up at his baby brother and asked, How the hell did you get through 3 years at the University of Kentucky without ending up on the basketball team? Shannon grinned and said, It turns out you need something more than just height to play basketball. You need something called skill and coordination, and I don't have those. Kai chuckled and said, That's okay. Neither do any of the players on the team. Louisville, Western Kentucky, and even Morehead State made it to the NCAA playoff, but somehow Kentucky just couldn't make it. Tell me about it. Not only that, but we got knocked out of the semifinals by Notre Dame. It has not been a good year to be a UK fan or player. Kai laughed. Yeah, I turned off the Elite Eight when I realized I wanted them all to lose. Sounds about right. Do you two think you could stop talking about basketball long enough to get our luggage and head to the car? Melissa asked. They haven't seen each other in 4 years, and the first thing they talk about is UK basketball. She looked at Kai and said, and you didn't even go to UK. You went to Florida. Kai shrugged and said, hey, cut me and I bleed UK blue. It felt good to joke with his family. It felt good to make an offhand comment that he knew would be understood. With a smile he added, well, come on, the baggage carousel is over here. By the time they got their luggage, got out of the parking lot, and back to Dauphin Island, it was over an hour. They talked of small things, about the triplets, and about the city, and about his job with GCL&M. They spoke of Shannon's and Melissa's academic career at UK and Transylvania University. They were careful to avoid hurtful subjects. When they got to the house, Chastel had the kids in the living room and was waiting with Southern iced tea for everyone. Introductions were made, the babies were held, and then Chastel showed them to their rooms upstairs. Shannon had been surprised that nobody was sharing a room. Kai and Chastel had plans to fill every room in the house with children, but for now they had spare rooms to use as guest rooms. After all the initial meet and greets and settling in were finished, Kai found himself sitting in the den with Shannon. There was an uncomfortable silence between them that Kai hated. Finally, Shannon broke the silence and said, Kai, I'm sorry for everything that happened. Why are you sorry? He asked. You didn't do anything. Shannon nodded and said, I know, but I just felt so helpless. I felt there was something I could have done, something I should have done, but I didn't. I just don't know what it was. Kai smiled wanly and said, there was nothing you could have done. You are not responsible for other people's bad decisions. I could have warned you, I guess. Kai nodded and replied, I know that you knew. I know that you wanted to tell me, and I know that Dad and Grace backed you into a corner to wait until after my finals. If someone had said something earlier, part of it could have been avoided, but I hold some responsibility there. I could have called ahead. I could have told someone I was coming home, but I wanted it to be a surprise. It just turned out to be the wrong kind of surprise. He was amazed that he was able to sit here and have that conversation with Shannon about it. He suspected he would have another one just like it with his mother and with Melissa. He understood that they all needed to clear the air and it would come in time. Hunter had warned him that this was likely to happen. I just feel bad about it. It's okay. I appreciate that you do, but it's not your place to take responsibility. You're my baby brother, and you were trying to look out for me the best way you knew how. You were just a kid, not even out of high school. That's what Mom tells me, but I guess I just want to fix things. He stopped a moment and said, oh yeah, I forgot about this. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small black box that looked familiar to Kai. You left this somewhere. I hung on to it until I could get it back to you. He then tossed the box to Kai. Kai snatched the box from the air and opened it, looking inside. His heart raced suddenly at the images the ring brought back. He shook his head and said, you keep it. It has no value to me anymore. He tossed it back. Catching it in midair, Shannon shook his head and said, Kai, that ring is valuable. I saw the certificate on it. It's valuable if you try to buy it at a jewelry store. If you try to sell it, you'd be surprised at how little a jeweler will offer you back for it. They'll of course turn around and resell it for the same ridiculous price. Keep it. If you feel like it, use it as an engagement ring, or give it to Mom or Melissa. I'm not getting engaged to my sister, Eastern Kentucky stereotypes notwithstanding. No, but it would be a nice gesture. I'll give it to Mom. That works, Kai said. How is she doing? Shannon shook his head and said, not good. The divorce hurt her badly. Then the situation with you and Sebastian happened. Now, and mind you, this is my own opinion, and I'll admit my biases, but I think that Sebastian and Chelsea take advantage of her as a babysitter. Come take a walk with me, Kai said. Where to? Out back. I want to show you something and get your opinion about it. Okay, Shannon replied as he rose from his seat and followed. Kai took him to the small apartment that was attached to the pool house. As the two picked their way around the pool, he opened the door to the apartment and said, we had this renovated when we bought the house, in case Ryan ever needed a place to stay, but do you think Mother would be interested in moving in here? That's a bit sudden, isn't it? Shannon asked. Kai nodded and said, Chastel and I've talked about it. It was her idea. I think Mom needs a break for a while. I know Chastel could use the company. What do you mean, Chastel could use the company? Chastel and I decided. Actually, Chastel decided and told me that she plans on being a stay-at-home mom until our last child enters elementary school. She's going to keep up her studies so when she does go back to work there won't be a big gap in her skills, but she's afraid she'll go stir crazy in the house with just the kids to keep her occupied. Triplets will keep anybody occupied. He stopped and looked at Kai. This isn't an attempt to get a free babysitter, is it? Like I said, I think Sebastian and Chelsea are abusing the privilege. Kai shook his head. No, we can afford a babysitter anytime we need it. I just want Mother to be able to take it easy. Things didn't turn out well for her after the divorce. Think of it as my attempt to make up for my part in the trouble between me and Sebastian. Stop right there, Kai. You told me that I was not guilty for what happened there. Well, neither are you. Everything you did was completely reasonable. Even going no contact with family? Kai asked. Even that. Hell, that was probably the only thing that kept you sane. You missed the whole mess with Dad. He was quick to forgive and forget every time the grandbaby was mentioned. Shannon chuckled darkly. I think he's figuring out that by siding with Sebastian, that he's losing out on more grandbabies. I don't want him to side with anyone, Kai protested. I know, and believe it or not, neither does Sebastian. At least not anymore. Dad and Grace got into a big argument about some things she said about everything that happened, and Dad is just now starting to figure out some of what really happened. I have no idea what you're talking about. Shannon took a deep breath. What you probably don't know is that Grace encouraged Sebastian and Chelsea to become a couple. And she blamed you for everything that happened, saying that Chelsea shouldn't have to wait for her man to come home. What? Kai protested. And she blames you for attacking Bastian and says that you got what you deserved. Kai let that sink in. He found himself only a little angry about it, but it was a strange and detached anger. Like he was angry at someone who meant nothing to him. He just nodded and said, well, that confirms my estimation of her moral and intellectual compass. Shannon laughed. Mine too. About the suite? Do you think Mom will go for it? She might. I know the winters are getting harder on her. We've had a couple of really cold winters lately and I worry about her. Tell you what? Why don't we see how this visit goes, and if we both agree toward the end, you can help me convince her. Wait a minute. Are you actually going to take my recommendation into consideration? Why not? You have more experience with her situation of late. Why wouldn't I? Shannon just shrugged and said, because you'd be the first person to do that. Kai nodded and said, I see. Sebastian and Dad are still treating you like a kid? In a word, yeah. Well, I appreciate your input and your candor. Thanks. I don't know how much good it will do you. Well, think about it. In the meantime, why don't we go in and see how the ladies are doing? We're outnumbered, brother of mine. We can't afford to turn our backs on them for too long. I think we can handle it. They turned and walked into the house where they found the ladies sitting around the kitchen table, each holding a baby and feeding them a bottle. Chastel was speaking. Well, Hunter comes from a friend of ours. He introduced Kai to my brother who introduced him to me. He's been a very good friend over the years. Jamie is from my dad's dad. He died in Kentucky before I was born, and Opal was my mother's stepfather's great-aunt who died when she was young. She was a twin to his great-grandfather, I think, whose name was Ophir. She smiled at them and said, I get to name the next boy, and Kai gets to name the next girl. After triplets, you're planning on more? Yeah, we both want a large family. Ruth Darrow studied her middle son closely as he interacted with not only his wife and children, but with his younger brother and sister as well. He had a wariness to him that contact with his siblings seemed to be wearing down. She could see the hurt in his eyes sometimes, but it was clear he was working hard to get over it. There was a gentleness in his soul that she saw every time he spoke to his wife and children. There was something very different about him now. It was as if Rain had really died, and Kai had risen from the ashes. She could see a controlled power in his movements, in his hands, and even when he was sitting. It was as if he was being careful around other people and things, as if they were fragile. She'd quickly learned not to walk on or approach him from his left because he was blind on that side from the beating. He'd walked into her at least twice because she hadn't realized he couldn't see her on that side. Those times she felt hard muscles underneath the pale blue polo shirt he had worn. As for Chastel, she was all Ruth could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law. She was pretty, beautiful even, intelligent, kind, and most importantly, she treated her son like he deserved to be treated. She was loving and protective of her children, sometimes giving Ruth the impression of a she-wolf watching over her cubs. It was clear that she loved Kai dearly and that the two had each other's backs. Currently, the children were asleep in the den, and the 5 of them were out on the back deck. Kai and Shannon were in their swimming trunks taking turns diving off the board. Ruth could see that hard muscle she'd felt under his shirt and was duly impressed with the hard work it took to get there. His skin tone, although usually fair, was turning golden under the warm South Alabama sun. and Ruth had to admit that he had really filled out over the last few years. Gone was the thin, bookish boy who was always more interested in his computer software than being outside, and in his place was a young man who would give the most arduous gym rat pause. Chastel and Melissa were both wearing modest bathing suits and were lying on the loungers in the sun. Ruth was sitting in the shade taking it all in. For the first time in years, she felt warm, she felt safe, and she was comfortable. She hadn't realized how haggard and tired she was until she came down here and was actually able to relax. It was clear that her son was doing well for himself and his family. They all were healthy and happy. He had a good job where he made excellent money and received accolades for his effort, skills, and talents. His wife was a good mother, and they seemed to lack for little. She had to admit that the decision to move down here, to refrain from contact with his family until he'd healed, had been the right one. Still, she missed her son. "I could get used to this," she said softly as she watched her two youngest sons roughhouse in the water. Even then, Kai seemed to be taking great care not to hurt his younger brother. "It's a nice life," Chastel said. "It's one that Kai and I have worked very hard to build for ourselves and our children. You would not believe the hours he was putting in over the last few months of his last project." "What now?" Melissa asked. "Is there a new project coming up?" "Yeah, his company has been approached by Warner Brothers to help with the CGI for a couple of upcoming sci-fi flicks. Kai's currently going over scripts and storyboards. They're giving him a bit more leeway after seeing the final results from what he did on the previous one." "When will the rest of us get to see this work?" Melissa asked. "It comes out this Christmas. I think it's going to be a major blockbuster." "Good," Melissa told her. "I'm looking forward to seeing it." "What do you guys do for entertainment?" Shannon asked, coming out of the pool and grabbing a towel. "Up until the triplets came, we would go hiking in the woods a lot. Kai likes to fish. We sometimes charter a boat and go out into the Gulf for some deep-sea fishing. We have friends and family we visit with," Chastel said, picking up her phone. "I suspect that my brother, Ryan, may drop by this afternoon to see how everything is going." "Is he cute?" Melissa asked with a sly grin. "He's my twin brother. I haven't really paid that much attention." Melissa replied. "I'll take that as a yes." "And how did you come to that conclusion?" Chastel asked. "Well, whenever people ask me if my brother is cute, I usually say the same thing. But as I'm cute, I have to admit that he is too." "That is some twisted logic, girl," Shannon said as he plopped down in a chair next to Ruth and continued drying his blonde hair. Knock, knock. A tall, handsome young man with the same tawny blonde hair as Chastel said from the back gate. "Speak of the devil and he shall appear," Kai said from the diving board. "I thought I'd come around the back way. Chas says this is usually the kiddos' nap time." "Come on in," Chastel said. Then turning to Melissa, she said, "Melissa Darrow, this is my brother Ryan. Ryan, this is Melissa, Ruth, and Shannon." She winked at Melissa and then told her brother, "Melissa was wondering if you were cute." "Chastel," Melissa protested as she turned bright red. "Of course, I'm cute," Ryan said with a smile. "And smart, talented, and I'm kind to small children and animals. Laying it on a bit thick, aren't you, bro? Hey, if I don't blow my own horn, who'll blow it for me?" Then turning to the others, he said, "It's nice to meet you. Chas has told me a lot about you." Ruth raised an eyebrow at that, but said nothing. "I'm glad to meet you too, Ryan." "Thank you, ma'am," he replied. Then he added, "Mom and Dad wanted me to let you guys know that you've all been invited to Bon Travail for Saturday evening. Lance is having a pick-in." "Pick-in?" Shannon asked. "Cookout, bonfire, and local musicians sitting around picking out old country and gospel songs. It's sort of become part of the local scene. To get invited to one is a big deal. It's where Mom and Dad met." Ruth couldn't help but notice a bit of humor between Ryan, Chastel, and Kai. There was a story behind that comment. "Who is Lance?" Shannon asked. "Lance McKnight, Commander, U.S. Navy, retired. He's Mom's cousin by marriage, although the by marriage part is usually ignored. He's just family." "What about the kids?" Melissa asked. 3 infants can be a handful." "Oh, they can come too. I'm sure Mom will be glad to spell anybody who wants to spend some time at the bonfire. And if Mom doesn't..." "Yeah, like that's going to happen," Chastel interjected. "Then Dad will be more than happy to step up to the plate. It sounds like it might be fun. Can't say I'm thrilled about the music, but I can cope," Melissa said. "Oh, don't let the old country fool you. They also do a lot of Southern rock and even some classic rock. It really does sound like fun." Melissa looked over at her mom and at Chastel. "I think I would like that," Ruth told them. "Then it's on," Ryan said. He looked at his sister. "Are you going to need help getting everyone there?" "Probably. The SUV will only handle so many people and 3 car seats take up a bit of room." Ryan smiled and said, "In that case, I can stop by and pick up Shannon and Melissa." "Okay," Ruth said. "What time?" "People usually start arriving around 6. I'll pick you guys up at 5. Just how far away is this place?" "As the crow flies, about 30 miles. On the roads, it's about 65 miles. You have to go up and around the bay." "This place is bigger than I expected," Shannon commented. "Not really. It's just that the bay gets in the way. Normally, we could take the ferry across to Fort Morgan and then up the Baldwin County side. But we can't take it home because it doesn't run after dark." "Too bad," Shannon said. "I've never been on a ferry before." Ryan smiled and said, "I tell you what, why don't the three of us go out sightseeing today and let your mom catch up with Kai and Chaz?" Ruth could see them almost ask permission. She finally said, "You both are over 21. You don't have to ask my permission." Melissa grinned and said, "Give me 20 minutes to get changed." "Sounds good," he replied. Then looking over at Shannon, he asked, "You coming?" Shannon just nodded and said, "Sure. I won't need 20 minutes though." He then grabbed his towel and headed into the house, being careful not to wake the triplets. 20 minutes later, Ruth was feeding Hunter, while Kai and Chastel fed the girls, and Shannon and Melissa were leaving. When they were gone, Ruth turned to Kai and asked, "I didn't just make a mistake, did I?" "What do you mean?" "With Melissa and Shannon?" She said, "Ryan's a good guy. He won't take them anywhere you wouldn't want them to go, but you were right about one thing." "What?" "They're 21 and can decide for themselves." "Yeah, but a mother worries." "Yes, we do," Chastel said. "How are you liking the Bay Area?" Kai asked as he changed the subject. "From what I've seen of it, it's nice," she told him. "I like the climate." "Yeah, you would think it would be stifling hot, but we get a breeze off the Gulf that keeps it cool. There's usually some excitement about hurricane season, but we don't get hit that often," Chastel said. "How are you doing, Mom?" Kai asked. "Fine, I guess," she said. "I'm still a bit tired from the flight." "I mean, how are you doing at home? I know that things can't have been easy on you after the divorce." She frowned as she juggled the bottle for her grandson. "They're as well as can be expected. Shannon and Melissa have been a great comfort to me." "I'm sorry I couldn't be there," Kai said. "Now don't you go there. You have perfectly legitimate reasons for staying away." "To be honest, if I had someplace to go, I'd stay away too." "Really?" he asked. She nodded and said, "Yeah, I think I need a fresh start too, away from your dad and that woman. I think that once I can get Shannon and Melissa through college, I may just move somewhere else." "You are always welcome to stay with us," he told his mom. "We've got the room." "I couldn't impose on you," she told him as she looked toward Chastel. "You two are only just married. You need to find who you are as a couple." She nodded to Hunter in her arms, "and as a family before you deal with a mother-in-law." "Actually, we already talked about this," Chastel said. "I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom for a few years, and it would be nice to have another adult to talk to during the day." Chastel looked over at her husband and added, "But no pressure. The spot is here for you when you're ready." Ruth smiled broadly. It had been a while since she felt this relaxed, since she felt this good. "I do appreciate the offer, and if I may take you up on regular visits." "Of course," Chastel said. "We'd be glad to have you." Melissa Darrow thought that Ryan Lee was more than cute. He was good-looking, smart, and quite friendly. She thought it rather nice of him to offer to take her and Shannon sightseeing. Of course, she wasn't naive enough to think that he was doing this out of being a good guy. She recognized he had an interest in her, and to be honest, it was reciprocated. Shannon was just along because it made things more acceptable. She suspected that if he had a way to bail and leave them alone, he would. "So, what do you want to see first?" he asked as they pulled out of Kai's driveway. "Well, you promised me a ferry ride," she told him. "I could do the ferry," Shannon added. "Then, why don't we take the ferry over to Fort Morgan, and then we can work our way counterclockwise around the bay. We can hit most of the sites that way." "Just how big is this city?" "Actually, it's 2 cities inside Alabama, Mobile and Gulf City, plus all their bedroom communities, and that's almost 1 million people. If you toss in Pensacola, Florida, you're over 1 million. Funny, I just don't see it as that many people. Natural features tend to bunch people up and then spread out the bunches. Sort of like mountains," Shannon suggested. "Something like that. Flat areas are usually best." "How long does it take to get to the ferry?" Shannon asked. "Less than 5 minutes," Ryan told him. "Dauphin Island isn't that big, and it's rather exclusive. Some of the most expensive homes in the Bay Area are located here." True to his word, it was less than 5 minutes until they were pulling into line for the ferry. Luckily, it wasn't very crowded this time of day, and they were able to board and pay their toll without much of a wait. Once the man had taken their toll, Ryan said, "Might as well get out. The view's better along the rails." They all left the car and headed over to the staging area until the ferry was underway. They listened to the brief safety instructions. Right afterward, Shannon smiled at her and said, "I think I'll go watch the island side of the ferry." Melissa smiled back at him and nodded. Message received and understood. She then turned and leaned against the railing as the water began to slip past them. Ryan joined her, and they stood there silent for several moments before Melissa asked, "Can I ask you a question and get a real answer?" "Depends on the question," Ryan told her. "How is Kai doing? I mean, really doing? I see all the signs of success and a happy marriage, but I have no idea how he coped with what happened back home." Ryan shrugged and said, "I don't know what happened back then. I think the only person he's ever talked about it to is Chastel. Hunter may know, but if he does, he's keeping it to himself. I can only tell you what I've seen." "That's fair," she replied. "When I first met him, which was not long after he met Hunter, he was still a mess. I know he had just gotten a cast off his arm, and he was adjusting to being blind in his left eye. He still walked with a limp, but I think all the bruising was gone. Like I said, I don't know what happened, but it looked like he'd been beaten within an inch of his life. He was still seeing a doctor occasionally then. Emotionally, he was a wreck. He was a broken man, and a shell of whatever he'd been before it. He hid it pretty well, but sometimes you could see the pain and hurt still in his eyes. But with the help of a few new friends, he pulled through. I know his friendship with Hunter made a huge difference. The two just seemed to hit it off from the beginning. I'm glad he had someone like Hunter to help him through. When he came to in the hospital, he cut ties with everybody. He wouldn't talk to us, or even let us see him. As soon as the doctor released him, he left. We thought for Gainesville, but evidently it was for here. This was where he had a job lined up. I suspect he came here and threw himself into his work until Hunter found him. It's possible." She looked out over the water to the city in the distance. She could hear the pain and frustration in her own voice. Mom and Dad's divorce tore the family apart. What happened with Kai blew it to pieces. But his leaving, God help us, brought us back together. We weren't like we were before, but we functioned. I'm wondering what this trip is going to do to that. I can't really say. I don't know the details. She could sense that he wanted to ask her about them but didn't. She could appreciate that. "What about you?" Ryan asked. "How are you liking it this far south?" "I don't know yet. I think I would miss having 4 seasons. "Oh, we have 4 seasons. Our winters are pretty mild, and our summers aren't as harsh as you would expect, but you can definitely tell when it's winter. And of course, the spring brings the floods, and all the local wildlife climb the trees to escape it. Sounds like back home. When the spring runoff comes down out of the mountains, the Ohio River floods and backs up most of the local creeks. For the most part, they manage it with the dams, but it can make life interesting. We're at the end of the line, so nearby dams don't do us nearly as much good as the ones upriver. You're dealing with one river. We've got 5 emptying into the 4th largest estuary in the United States. You know an awful lot of information about the area. I mean more than the average person would know. What gives?" He laughed and said, "Would you believe I had a job as a tour guide when I was in college?" "What was your major?" "Wildlife management and ecology." "I think that may have more to do with it than the tour guide job." "Is that what you do for a living?" Ryan nodded his head and said, "I'm a ranger for the Blakely State Park." "No wonder you know so much about it. Where did you go to school?" "Wildlife management degree?" "The best place in the country for that degree, Auburn." He grinned and then asked, "What about you? Are you in college? Do you work?" "I'm a senior at Transylvania University." "In Transylvania?" he asked, and Melissa wasn't sure he was serious. "No, in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm a chemistry major, just like my brother, Shannon." He grinned and said, "Ah, a whole new category of math." She nodded and told him, "Pretty much. What are you planning on doing with a chemistry degree?" "Be a chemist for a corporation. Being a woman in a STEM field means I'm going to be in demand." "Why are you and Shannon at different schools then?" "Scholarships. Transy offered me a better scholarship than UK. University of Kentucky offered Shannon a better one than Transy. I like the way you guys think." Melissa couldn't help but think that she hoped he liked other things about her too. It was a warm night as Hunter watched as 2 cars disgorged the Darrow and Lee clans at Bon Travail. He smiled to himself when he noted that Melissa had arrived with Ryan. That was an entanglement he'd not considered, but would further the plan that he'd been instructed to see was implemented. Noting that the Darrows had brought the 3 children, he was glad that he'd seen to a clear and warm night. It would make things a little more uncomfortable for the musicians and others near the bonfire, but that was a small price to pay to bring these 2 families together. "You seem rather pleased with yourself, Hunter," Lance McKnight said as he walked up and handed Hunter a beer. "I'm just glad to see that with your father's passing that you haven't ended these get-togethers. They mean a lot to me." They are all memories of good times I shared with him, Dale and Lucy. Even the one that Louv Chastel attacked? Lance smiled and answered, even that one. The attack caught us off guard, but it was still a bonding moment for my friends and my cousin. And I appreciate the invitation, Hunter added. You don't need an invitation, you're always welcome at Bon Travail. McKnight watched as Chastel and Kai removed the triplets from the back of the Escalade. The tall, lanky male Darrow twin went to the back of the vehicle and unloaded some sort of portable crib. Ryan waved to them and called, "Where should we set up for the kids?" Next to him, Lance indicated the back patio and said, "Right over there by the door. That way if you need to take them in for anything, you'll be right next to the door." He then looked back to Hunter and said, "I am however glad that I moved the Pickens from our overseer's house to the main house. Lucy's getting up in years, and it's easier on her to take the downstairs suite. Her and Dad couldn't keep climbing those stairs." "Who lives there now?" Hunter asked. "My youngest son and grandson." "What happened to his wife?" Lance chuckled darkly and said, "She decided she couldn't handle the weirdness of being a McKnight. Last we heard, she was living in a commune in Oregon." Hunter nodded and understood. Lance's youngest son had shown a great deal of talent and strength in his witcheries. His son was probably going to be the same. I suppose he wants to be on his own? He's trying. He's still hurting from the breakup. The overseer's house gives him that, while also supplying him with a solid concrete home that little Tristan isn't likely to break, as well as a place I can keep an eye on them. Are they going to be here tonight? Lance shook his head. No, they left yesterday for an extended camping trip up near Huntsville. Hunter turned his attention back to the Darrow twins, first Shannon and then Melissa. As he studied their matrix, he realized that they had nearly the same potential as Kai had. It would not take much to nudge them from potential to active. Kai's witcheries had been born of pain and blood. It did not have to be that way. It was something to consider. So tell me, Hunter, exactly what do you see when you stare at people like that? Like what? Like a scientist studying an unusual subject under a microscope. Hunter smiled and said, potential. Of all the people in the world to simply nod at that comment, Lance was one of the few he could be sure that meant it. Finally, he added, let's just not have a repeat performance of Louv and Cassandra. I barely kept her from taking up permanent residence last time. Not all potential has to be born like that. Just how many people who are going to be here tonight are Witchkin? Lance shrugged and said, a fair amount, but not as many as you would expect. He nodded and said, the Darrows and the Lees, of course. Beyond that, not many. This is about the music and the friendship, not about the witcheries. If I wanted to discuss that kind of thing, I'd go through Grandmother Beaumare. And the reason for inviting the other Darrows? To be neighborly, Lance told him. Not everything has to be manipulative. I don't operate that way. Hence the reason you're not the head of the OAI? Lance smirked. No, that's a completely different ball of string. I don't like leaving people out in the cold when they're in danger. He sighed and added, but I invited them in hopes that they could see Kai as we know him. Not the witcheries, of course, but to see him as more than just a father, son, or husband, but as a man with friends and family who love him and care about him. You're getting soft in your old age. If you say so, Your Highness. Hunter spun on the man and demanded, what? I may not be the head of the OAI, but I have my own intelligence network. Hunter, tell me, were you ever going to tell any of us exactly who or what you are? Hunter crossed his arms, shook his head and said, no, didn't think so, Lance told him. If you'll excuse me, the musicians are starting to arrive, and I feel like a little Johnny Horton tonight. Hunter realized he'd been too clever by far, and had somehow gotten Lance to start digging into who and what he was. He just wondered who he could have spoken to in order to find out that bit of information. November 2014. Are you sure about this? Chastel asked Kai as they stood in the main concourse at the Huntington, West Virginia airport. It's too late to back out now, he said wryly. Oh, do not underestimate me, husband mine. If you were having strong enough second thoughts, I'd be buying tickets back home in an instant. Then without looking up, she whispered, Opal, you get back here this instant, and then growled softly. Kai watched his 6-year-old daughter, who had managed to wander about 20 feet away, suddenly stop in her tracks and then without looking backed up to where she was just out of her mom's reach. Of all their children, Opal was the one who seemed to want to wander the most. Sorry, Mom, she whispered. Just stay close, Chastel said before looking up at Kai and saying, I guess we'd better go ahead and get the rental. Kai smiled, took Opal's left hand and told her, remember what I said about keeping together? She looked up at her dad and nodded, yes, sir. Okay, I need you to be in charge. Your mom's got to carry Asher, and I have to worry about the luggage. I need you to take Hunter's hand and Hunter to take Jamie's hand, and hold onto the luggage cart with your other hand. Can you do that for me? Yes, sir, she replied. Good. Now take care of it. Yes, Daddy. Chastel looked over at him and smiled. How come that works for you and not me? Probably for the same reason I can't growl and get their attention like you do. There is that. Now let's get to the rental. 10 minutes later, they had Opal and Jamie installed in the back row of seats in the minivan they'd rented, and the baby and Hunter in his car seat in the second row, and were heading down US 64 toward the Catlettsburg exit, which was literally only a mile away. Okay, what do we do when we get to Grandma Ruth's house? Chastel asked. We're to be on our best behavior. Use our indoor voices. Don't chase the cats, even if they run. The last was Hunter. He didn't want to hurt the cat, he just wanted to pet it. But most cats could smell something off with him and gave him a wide berth. And Hunter could run very fast, so that could be problematic. Relax, honey, he told her. They're not old enough to shift yet. You're acting more nervous than I am. This is our first trip to your mom's house. I want everything to go smoothly. I do too. You have no idea how much I do too. But getting my stomach in a knot about it is not going to help. Are you sure about this? She asked again. I either have to learn to look the rest of my family in the eye or live my life as a coward. You're no coward. I'd like to believe that. But we won't really know until this weekend, will we? At least Ryan and Melissa will be coming up from Paducah. There is that. I'm just wondering where Mom is going to put us all. Her house isn't exactly big. Melissa and Ryan are staying with your dad. I do not envy them that, he replied. Why? Because Ryan tells me that Dad keeps pressuring him about two things. And they are? Grandchildren and me. Well, this Thanksgiving should be nice and calm. He's getting both his wishes. Let's hope. I don't think they'd try to keep the fact that Melissa's pregnant from him. We'll just see about how I handle meeting him. And Grace. Grace isn't someone I consider important. But she does, Chaz told him. Yeah, but the big part is going to be facing Sebastian and Chelsea. You've got this. You are not the same man you were the last time you saw either one of them. I hope that's true. Believe me, it's true. He smiled at her, but in his soul, the thought of seeing his brother again set his heart racing, and he knew she could probably hear it. But instead of saying anything, she reached over and squeezed his arm in a sign of affection. That tactile connection allowed him to reach deep inside himself and find his center. His heart rate slowed, and he felt better. She was his rock. She had his back, and that was all he needed to understand right now. He would get through this. How long until we get there? Hunter asked from the back seat. About 20 minutes, not long at all. Our airplane flight was longer. And true to his word, less than 20 minutes later, he was pulling into the driveway of his mom's little house on Kent Street in Raceland. It was a small brick home with a two-car garage that was nearly as big as the house itself. 2 cars were parked in front of the right garage doors, so he used the parking space on the left. We're here. Now everyone, be on your best behavior, and remember to tell Grandma Ruth that you love her. We will, the triplets sang in unison. As they exited the minivan, Shannon came out the front door. After hugging Kai and Chastel, he said to Chaz, I have the following instructions. You are to take the baby inside so Mom can see him, and I'm supposed to help get the terror trio out of the van and the luggage. Yes, sir, Chaz told him with a mock salute before unstrapping the seat from the carrier and heading inside, while Kai and Shannon herded the triplets, each carrying an overnight bag. You've about got them trained, Shannon smiled at the kids. When there are 3 of them, that's the way you pretty much have to do things. Each of them knows what they are responsible for. Kai felt the cool November air turn warm and dry as he entered his mother's home. Looking around, he was surprised to see his dad standing there. The children were off to the side, standing in front of the window, giving his dad the strangest look. Mom, where do you want these? You and Chaz are sleeping in the first room on the right, Melissa's old room. Shannon's in his own room. Where do you want Opal, Jamie, and Hunter? Shannon, why don't you show them? Shannon smiled and said, Come on, kids. Let me show you what I've been working on all week for you. Bring your luggage. That got the kids excited as he led them through the kitchen and into the garage. Kai grinned and watched them follow Shannon out the door like 3 little ducklings. Shannon was one of their favorite people in the world. Kai thought his brother spoiled them but was willing to admit that was what uncles were supposed to do. After putting down the luggage in Melissa's old room, he turned back to check on the kids, but his dad stopped him. Hello, Rain. His father offered him his hand. Shaking it, Kai forced himself to look into his dad's eyes. It was the hardest thing to do because he'd reminded himself that this man knew exactly what had happened to him 9 years ago. He didn't know what he expected to see or feel. What he didn't expect was nothing. No sadness, no recrimination, no pity, no joy, but nothing at all. It was as if Kai didn't mean anything to him. Hello, Dad. he finally managed to say in an even tone. How have you been? His dad asked nervously. Kai shrugged and said, okay. He smiled and indicated first Chaz, and then the door to where the kids had disappeared. I've had my hands full. His dad chuckled and told him, it would appear so. You starting your own army? It could look like that. He looked around and asked, where's Grace? She's at home waiting for Melissa and Ryan. Before Kai could answer, 3 squeals of delight came from the garage. Give me just a second. He pushed past his dad, through the kitchen, and looked into the garage. Kai was impressed. Evidently, Shannon had really been working hard. The garage had been insulated, and the walls sheet-rocked and painted. A large convection heater hung from the ceiling. In one section, he had laid down some padding and put AstroTurf on top of it. Sitting in a circle in the middle of it were 3 small pop-up tents, with cots in them. There was a large television off to the side, and a lot of cushions around the grass. I'm impressed, Kai told his brother. I know how much you guys like to go camping, so I decided to make this Thanksgiving an outdoor adventure for them. I've got the television Wi-Fi to Mom's modem, and our Prime account set to kids on this one. Kai smiled over at his brother and said, bro, you're the best uncle in the world. Yeah. The 3 kids agreed and swarmed Shannon. Returning to the living room, he said, honey, you should see what Shannon did for the kids. I'll look in just a minute, she said as she handed Asher to Kai's mom. Your mom wants to hold Asher. Kai smiled as he watched his mother coo over their newborn for a moment. He then looked back into the garage where Shannon was holding Jamie and Opal as Hunter was wrapped around his right leg. All of them were smiling and having a wonderful time. Kids, let Uncle Shannon go and come here. I want you to meet someone. Dad? They nearly whined. Remember what we talked about. I need you to do this now. Like a switch, Hunter let go of his uncle who set the girls down and they filed back into the kitchen. He motioned for Chaz who came to stand beside him. Dad, this is my wife, Chastel, and our 3 oldest, Hunter, Opal, and Jamie. Mom has Asher. Chaz, kids, this is my dad, your grandpa Tom. Kai noticed that the kids were a bit wary around his dad. He thought they were reading his body language and were unsure how to treat him. Kai smiled and said, you can go give him a hug. For a second, the kids just stood there, something passing between them. Finally, Hunter stepped forward and said, hello, sir. I'm Hunter. Kai's dad dropped to one knee and gave the boy a hug. Then the process was repeated with the other 2. Hello, his dad answered, tears threatening his eyes as the kids warmed up to him. Finally, he stood and turned to Chaz. It's nice to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you from your brother and my twins. Oh dear, Chaz said with mischief in her eye. I'm in trouble. Tom laughed and said, nothing but good things. Now, I can't believe that about my brother. He never has good things to say about me. With a nod, his dad offered Chastel his hand. Just before Chaz took it, Asher let out a very large belch. Every eye in the room turned to him and laughed. That's my boy, Kai said with a smile. I don't see how you can sit there and tell me you don't regret what you did, Melissa said in shock. She and Ryan were sitting on her dad's sofa talking to Sebastian and Chelsea. Ryan was holding her hand. Grace was in the kitchen. Bastian shook his head and said, I regret hurting Rain, but I can't regret the relationship that gave me my daughters. That is just a line I can't cross. I don't see where they're the same thing, Melissa told him. If I hadn't crossed the line with Chelsea, then she'd have never become pregnant, and Tabitha wouldn't exist. That is the single most selfish thing I've ever heard you say, and you've been pretty selfish most of my life, Bastian. If you hadn't crossed that line, then Kai would have never been hurt. He would have never had no contact with most of the family and, therefore, never have met Chastel and married her, and I would have never met Ryan. But I recognize that you are justifying all the pain, all the heartache, and all the damage you did to our brother with the fact that you have Tabitha and Zoe. Do you really want to put that kind of guilt on them? That's wrong on so many levels. It's just the way I feel, Bastian told her. The same can be said of Rain's relationship and children. If that hadn't happened, he'd never have met his wife and had his children. So, all the pain Kai suffered is worth it because it gave you 2 daughters? Ryan asked. With that attitude, I don't see where you have any hope of ever reconciling with Kai. What I'm saying is that I regret and am very sorry for what I did to Rain, but I can't regret the outcome, which is a pretty good life for Chelsea, myself, and our daughters. Then what do you think you would say to Kai? Melissa asked. I'd ask him to forgive me, to be as happy for me as I am for him. Forgive you for what? Hurting him. How did you hurt him? Bastian looked at Ryan with concern in his eyes. For what I did. Which was? Melissa pressed. For having an affair with Chelsea. And? Again, Bastian looked at her husband. Do you think it's fair to mention it in front of your husband? If you can't admit what despicable thing you did to Kai in front of Ryan, how can you ever expect to do it in front of Kai? She could see Bastian lock eyes with Ryan, trying to cower him, but Melissa's husband was made of sterner stuff than that. Bastian never understood that he didn't stand a chance staring down a werewolf, even in human form. Finally, he looked away and said, for sleeping with his girlfriend, for getting her pregnant, and for beating him nearly to death and leaving him to suffer in front of Chelsea. There was something in Bastian's voice that made it clear that he was embarrassed more for himself than Kai in front of Ryan. Next to her, Ryan growled low. It was a clear statement of what he thought of Bastian and Chelsea. What he said and did, however, was far more devastating. He stood and said softly, I think I need some fresh air. It was clear what he meant fouled it. Then he left the room and went out the back door. Bastian looked up at her and asked, was it absolutely necessary to shame Rain, to shame me to your husband? Melissa shook her head. I didn't shame Kai to Ryan. Kai and Ryan's relationship isn't based on what you did. He's known Kai since then and has come to respect him and treat him as family. Ryan knows what kind of man Kai has become since that day. She paused, looked her brother dead in the eye, and said, and to be honest, if that fight were to happen today, he'd clean your clock 6 different ways from Sunday. He's not the younger brother you once knew. He's his own man, with his own successful business and his own accolades. He is well respected in the community where he lives and works and has more friends than he can count. So all the shame is on you. Bastian seemed to rise to the bait for just a second until Chelsea put her hand on his and squeezed. Then he finally said, I'm glad for him. The real question is, can we heal this rift? Chelsea finally asked. I don't know. Grace and Dad tore this family apart. You two went behind him and shattered the pieces. A lot of it rests on whether or not you can ask Kai to forgive you and give him a good reason to do so. Because we're brothers isn't good enough? Because we've been out of contact for 9 years isn't good enough? Listen to yourself, Bastian. You aren't even remorseful for what you did. Now you think that Kai should just let you waltz back into his life like nothing ever happened. What you both did was a betrayal of the highest order, and what you added to it, Bastian, was despicable. I know that, Bastian said. What should I have done? Stood there and taken a beating. That might have made a difference. It would at least have been the honorable thing to do, she told him frankly. It may have made things easier for you and Chelsea. I just couldn't do that. It would have broken me. So instead, you broke our brother, she told him. I guess. The difference is that he put his life back together with a little help from his friends. You, however, have put yours in a holding pattern, not venturing out of your comfort zone, not getting too far from your safety net. I once heard that eagles and hawks live longer because they have farther to go and more to do than other birds. Kai has a little golden statue with a name sitting on his mantle as a testament to where he's been and where he is going. What about you? That's harsh, Chelsea said. Bastian and I make good money at what we do, and we have a good life. Good for you, Melissa told her. But you are missing my point. You two don't seem to understand how badly you hurt our brother, and how badly you shattered the family. Worst of all, you don't seem to regret it. You want to sweep it under the rug and act like nothing happened. Something did happen. Something terrible, and you two are who did it. Dad wants us to reconcile, Sebastian said. I was happy leaving things as they were. Of course, you were. You haven't paid a price for what you did. You have skated along in the family, happy to be part of it. But for you to do that, Kai had to leave. His needs were sacrificed to yours. What should have been his safety net after the betrayal was taken away from him and given to you. All because you two couldn't bother to use a protection. Every time you needed something, the family was there to help you. For Kai, he did without, or it was Chastel's family and his friends, not Mother, not Dad, not me or Shannon, not you, and sure as hell, not Grace. Why should he be interested in reconciling with anyone? Then why is he here? Why has he established a relationship with you and Shannon and Mom? Because Shannon and I reached out, first to Chastel, and eventually to him. To answer your first question, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's him reaching out for reasons of his own. Maybe it's because when Ryan and I got married, it strengthened the family bond. Is that why we weren't invited to your wedding? He asked. Melissa nodded. Ryan wanted Kai as his best man. That wasn't going to happen with you there. So yeah, I had to choose between you and Kai for my wedding, and I chose Kai. Just like the family has chosen you for almost every other gathering. This needs to end, but it's not going to unless you can own up to your betrayal. It was a mistake, Chelsea said. Melissa shook her head and said, no, a mistake is misdialing a phone number. What you two did was not just one choice, but a whole series of hundreds of choices. Betrayal is the right word, and unless you can accept it, a reconciliation won't work. She turned to Bastian and said, You're letting your pride and your selfishness get in the way. What about Rain's pride and selfishness? How is Kai being prideful? How is he being selfish? Where is any of this his fault? If he hadn't spent so much time away, Chelsea began. Raising her hand to halt what she was saying, Melissa cut her off. He stayed faithful to you while he was away. Why shouldn't he expect that of you? The whole he shouldn't have been gone is Grace talking, and it's entirely a load of grade of bullshit. She paused for a moment and then asked, exactly what should Kai do to meet you halfway? What would that look like? I don't know. Telling us that we are forgiven? And then what? We all go on like one big happy family? Chelsea and Chastel go on playdates with the kids? Your family's vacation together? Exactly what are you wanting, brother mine? I want people to have to stop deciding on which of us they invite to family gatherings. That didn't seem to matter to you until it was you who got left out, she told him. Now, I know how Rain feels and I don't like it. I sincerely doubt that, Melissa said. But I can tell you this much. Kai knows that he's likely to bump into you this week. He's ready. How that goes will be entirely up to you too. Not Rain? Chelsea asked. Kai will react to how you treat him and treat you exactly the way you treat him, have treated him. It's going to be up to you to figure out how to mend things. He has no way of doing it that allows him to keep his dignity. She smiled and then added, except to return the favor and beat the unholy living hell out of you. What do you mean by keeping his dignity? Chelsea asked. Just that. You both stripped him of his dignity, you betrayed him, disrespected him, and brutally emasculated him. If he were to forgive you of that, it would mean that what you did was okay, and that it would be okay if you did it again. Trust me, Kai's not going to let that ever happen again. That's stupid, Sebastian said. Maybe, but that is the way it is. And you know it. If you want any kind of reconciliation with Kai, you're going to have to make it clear that you regret what you did, all of it, and ask for forgiveness. Both of you. Otherwise, there are going to be more events where we're going to have to decide which one of you to invite, and I suspect there will be far more where you won't be the first choice. Now, that's the truth. She got up and added, you're going to have to figure out what you want, Sebastian. In the meantime, I'm going to find my husband. With that, she left the house and went out into the front yard to find Ryan standing there, his hands in his pockets and fuming. Looking up, he saw her coming and said, you could have given me some warning in there. I never knew exactly what happened, and to have it sprung on me like that was a bit unsettling. I almost went fong and claw on your brother. I trust you, she said. It was a close thing, he told her, wrapping her up in his arms. He really did that? Melissa nodded into his chest. He did. No wonder Kai didn't want to come back, to talk to anybody in his family. That would be a horrible thing to face. That's worse than being driven out of the pack. I knew you would understand. You realize that you've permanently colored my perception of your older brother, don't you? Yeah, I know. And your dad allowed this? He didn't want to take sides between his sons. But in the end, he did. Yeah, and that's what is killing him. He took sides because of Tabitha, and that's understandable. But now there is more than just Tabitha, and he's having to figure out how to make things right. I wouldn't be surprised if he was pressuring Bastian to end this thing as much as he's pressuring us about kids. This Thanksgiving is not going to be boring. That's for sure. Chastel watched her husband as he roughhoused with the children in the front yard. She thought it was supposed to be football, but there was an awful lot of tickling going on, so she wasn't sure. She watched how careful he was around the triplets, like he was handling glass, but it just seemed natural to him, like he wasn't trying to be careful and he was simply playing. She had seen the strength in his limbs after Hunter Dare had helped him hone his witcheries to a fine edge. He could match any werewolf erg for erg in strength. He could keep up with the pack on runs and could roughhouse with either her or Ryan in their war form. She'd once seen him casually lift the front end of a tractor that was stuck in the mud and pull it out. But with the children, he was as gentle as could be. She watched as one child would distract him, while another slipped in from either his left side or from behind and tried to tackle him before they all went down in a pile of arms and legs, giggling and laughing. It does me good to see him play like that with the children, Ruth said as she handed Chastel a cup of coffee and sat down on the porch beside her. Tom never played with the boys very much. That's his loss, she replied. Yes, it is. Chastel heard Kai's phone buzz in his pocket. He immediately called a halt to the children, telling them, you guys go play now. I need to answer the phone. Immediately there was a whole new melee as Jamie and Opal tried to team up on Hunter, who was much better at evading them than his father. Kai looked at his phone, shrugged, and answered it. This is Kai. He suddenly stopped and stood perfectly still. I'm listening. Chastel pushed her blonde hair behind her ear and focused her hearing. It was a voice that she didn't recognize. I thought we could introduce the kids to their cousins, and maybe you and I could talk. That all depends on what you want to talk about. I want to clear things between you and me, Rain. This has gone on long enough. That depends on how you want to clear things, Sebastian. Kai's voice was cold steel. I don't like the fact that everybody thinks they can invite your family or mine to gatherings and not both at the same time. I want to put an end to that. So, you just want to let bygones be bygones? Just like that? Like nothing ever happened? It was 9 years ago, Sebastian nearly begged. All the bones have healed by now. I see. Kai's voice became cold. I'll tell you what. Bring your daughters by and let them meet Hunter, Jamie, and Opal. As for you and I talking, I don't see anything we have to talk about. Won't you even hear me out? Sebastian asked. I hear what you're saying, Sebastian, but 9 years is a little late. 9 years where you wouldn't let me near you. You blame me? That's a bit long to hold a grudge, Rain. That's 9 years without depth perception, Sebastian. 9 years of not being able to see out of my left eye. How are you going to make that right, Sebastian? It wasn't an accident. You deliberately beat the left side of my face until a bone broke loose and severed the optic nerve. You started the fight, Rain. I just finished it, Sebastian told him. The cause was sufficient. What does that even mean? Sebastian demanded. It means that you started it when you and Chelsea betrayed me. You finished it and left me lying bleeding on the floor. I'll ask again. How can you make that right? Are you telling me that you don't want to see me? I'm asking you, why should I? What is in it for me? Getting your brother back? Sebastian ventured. You put a higher value on yourself than I do, Kai told him. Finally, he sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. I'll tell you what. Bring your kids over to Mom's to meet my kids. I will remain civil as long as you do. Just understand that I'm doing this for the kids, not for you, and not for Chelsea. Understood. We'll be there in about 15 minutes. See you then. Chastel looked over at Ruth and said, This is not going to go over well. Kai took a moment to collect himself. She could see the hurt and pain in his eyes as he stared up at the cold November sky. Finally, he took a deep breath and changed his whole demeanor to the doting father. He turned back to where the girls were still trying to catch Hunter, who was turning out to be a bit more slippery than they expected. Kneeling in the grass, he called them over and said, I've got a surprise for you. What? Jamie asked. You know I told you that I have another brother, and that he has 2 little girls? Yeah. Opal's voice suddenly became wary. Well, they're coming over here to meet you. Do they like to play? Jamie asked. I mean like we do? Kai shrugged and said, I don't know. They're 9 and 6. I bet the 9-year-old is bossy, Hunter said. All 9-year-olds are bossy. What are their names? Opal asked. Kai looked to his mother for help. She got up from the porch and went over to them, her face looking worried. The oldest is named Tabitha, and the 6-year-old is Zoe. Are they nice? Opal asked, looking over at her father. It was clear that she sensed something was wrong. Kai nodded his head and hugged his daughter. I'm sure they're nice and that you will have a good time playing with them. Okay, Jamie said. We could use some help catching Hunter. Then, she turned and tackled her brother to the ground and started tickling him. Got you. Chaz got up and put a hand on Kai's shoulder. You sure about this, Kai? Her husband kissed his daughter on the head and stood up. Nodding, he said, Yeah, but Chastel could hear his heart pounding in his chest. She wasn't sure if he was having a flashback or not. Whatever he was feeling, he was keeping a tight control over it. Come on, children, Ruth said. Let's go in and make some hot cocoa to share with your cousins. Grandma Ruth, what's a cousin? Hunter asked. It's your uncle or aunt's child, her grandmother told her. Like Aunt Missy's baby will be? Just like that, Ruth told them as she herded the 3 children into the house. Do you want me to stay with you? Chaz asked Kai. He shook his head and told her, I'm not in any real danger. It's just my nerves and the memories. Besides, I suspect you will be having to deal with Chelsea. Let me ask you something? And please don't give an answer right off the bat. Search your feelings and give me a true answer, not what you think I want to hear. Okay, he gave her a puzzled look. Question 1. Did you love her? Question 2. Do you love her now? Kai shook his head and started to answer, but he listened to what she was saying to his heart. He searched his feelings and came to a remarkable conclusion. Taking a deep breath, he said, Yes, I loved her. I loved her right up to the moment that I walked into that bedroom. But I don't love her anymore. The images of them together have seared that completely out of my soul. I don't hate her anymore either. I am ambivalent about her. What about Sebastian? He shook his head and said, I'm still very hurt by what Sebastian did. It's not the sex, it's the betrayal. The fact that he would stoop so low as to do that to me hurts my heart, more than the beating did. The coldness in his voice when he walked out of that room with me, as a bloody pulp on the floor, has left an indelible dark mark on my brotherly love for him. Personally, I don't want to see him, but the only way we're going to make Dad happy is to go through with this. I don't give a shit about making your dad happy. My job is to have your back, to keep you happy. And that's your job for me. We both take care of our kids, and everything else is gravy. She smiled and said, and I've never cared too much for gravy. Why did you ask about if I still love Chelsea? Because that would determine how I would act toward her. And your decision? I won't gut her on the front lawn, she told him plainly. I think this is a bad idea, Sebastian, Chelsea told him as they pulled into his mother's driveway. Looking up, he saw Rain sitting on the steps. The cup he was holding was giving off wisps of steam. It's going to be fine, Chelsea. I'm not here to fight Rain. I just want to talk to him, he told his wife. Besides, the girls need to meet their cousins. Babe, she reached out and put a hand on his arm. You're pushing. Don't force this. We have no right to force this. What are you talking about? We need to end this charade. He needs to come to his senses. Do you hear yourself? She asked him. You aren't making any sense. I just want him to get his head on straight. Stop it, she nearly shouted. You need to get your head on straight. Rain is in no way responsible for what happened. I am, and you are. If you go out there like he owes you something, you're just going to make things worse. She then squeezed his arm. Besides, you're scaring the girls. That caught his attention. He turned around to see Tabitha and Zoe almost cringing in the back seat. You're right, he said. I'm getting manic about this. Maybe we should just turn around and go home, Chelsea said. No, Bastian replied and then shook his head. We promised the girls that they could meet their cousins. Then let's let them meet their cousins. You don't have to confront Rain right now. Take them inside. Talk to Mom. Meet his wife. Bastian said. I'll be in after Rain, and I talk. Come on, girls, Chelsea told the children. Let's go in and see Granny. Both girls nodded and slid out of their seats and quickly made their way to the front door. Sebastian watched as Chelsea navigated past Rain and through the front door. Something seemed to pass between his wife and his brother. Seeing her look at another man that way, the way she looked at him told him that there was still something in her heart for Rain. But the look he returned was indifference at best. Bastian could see how much it hurt her when he didn't return it. Bastian climbed out of the car and walked over to where Rain stood. He had to admit that his brother looked good. His blonde hair had sunstreaks through it, and he'd put on weight and muscle tone. Bastian watched as Rain tracked him with his eyes. He'd definitely put on some mass, but it looked lean and trim, as compared to the extra pounds Sebastian had gained from a slowing metabolism and aging. Honestly, even though Rain was in his early 30s, he could still pass for a younger man. Hello, Rain, he said as he walked up close to him. Rain looked him up and down and said, Hello, Sebastian. Look, can we talk this out? I'm not sure what there is to talk out, Rain told him. This whole thing where we can't be at the same gatherings as each other. That's ridiculous. We're adults. We were adults 9 years ago. But we settled things like men, Bastian said. Then things are settled? Rain asked. If that's the case, there's nothing to talk about. You know what I mean, Sebastian said. Part of Sebastian kept wanting to see Rain as the beaten and bloodied boy whom he'd already vanquished and put in his place. Part of him kept warning him that Rain wasn't that boy anymore. He was ignoring that part. What do you want from me, Sebastian? I want to be treated like your brother, he said. That ship sailed a long time ago, Sebastian. Blood notwithstanding, we'll never be brothers again. Brothers don't do what you did. I can either stay away, or we can act civilly toward each other when we are forced by circumstances to interact. But I'll never treat you like a brother. You broke that already. It was 9 years ago, Rain. You've moved on. You found your own girl and have built a life with her. I had a girl back then too, Sebastian. That is until I walked in on you screwing her. But you're right. I have a good wife. I have healthy and well-adjusted children, and I have a good life. I am over the affair you two had. What I'm not over is being stabbed in the back and then beaten. You didn't set out to just take from me my girl. You set out to humiliate and emasculate me. And you did. It took a lot of work to get back up and dust myself off. And when I did, I realized that I didn't need you in my life. I was perfectly happy without you. That wasn't it at all, Rain. You hit me and I saw red. I just went berserk and don't remember much of what happened after that. That's okay, Sebastian. I remember every blow, every kick, and every word. When you left, you made sure that I understood you were the one in charge. If I'm in charge, then why are you giving me this grief now? I'm not giving you grief. I'm giving you exactly what you give me, what you gave me. Rain frowned and said, and I'm not that boy anymore. You killed that boy. You killed Rain. Now, I'm someone entirely different, and if you want a relationship with me, you're going to have to deal with me as an equal. If not, I'll give you back everything you give me. Sebastian shook his head and said, no matter what you say, you'll always be my little brother. Nothing you can say or do will change that. No. No, what? I do not now, nor will I ever again see you as my brother. Then what do you see me as? A pathetic bully, mainly. Someone who I once cared for, but who betrayed me, and is now something unpleasant I have to tolerate, but not anybody I have any affection for. I don't hate you. I just don't care about you. Rain's words hit him hard. He wasn't interested in reconciling, only in being able to be civil when in the same room. It was eating at Sebastian. It was 10 years ago. Why is he still holding a grudge? That's cold, man. Rain gave him a strange look, almost as if he couldn't believe what Sebastian was asking. He sighed and asked, what do you need from me, Sebastian? What else do you want to take from me? Just your forgiveness, just your love as a brother. What have you done to make things right? You're asking for a great deal. Forgiving me is a great deal? Sebastian asked. How? Rain looked down at the ground and sighed. Sebastian felt like a child who just could not understand a lesson. Finally, he looked up and dead into Sebastian's eyes. What Sebastian saw there made his blood run cold. There was flint in his ice-blue eyes. I can be civil to you at family gatherings. I can even be civil to Chelsea, and I will never, ever hold what you two did against your daughters. But that's all. That's all I have to give you. You want my forgiveness. You're going to have to earn it. How? Fix what you broke. Exactly what did I break? Besides my body and my heart, you broke my trust. Until you prove otherwise, I'll never trust you again. Even now, I halfway expect you to take a swing at me. And to be honest, there's a part of me that hopes you would so I can stomp a mud hole in your butt and then kick it dry. But I said I would be civil, and I will. But I don't trust you. Sebastian looked down at his feet. I guess that's fair. I'll tell you what I told Melissa and Ryan. I regret that I hurt you. I regret that more than I can ever tell you. But I can't force myself to regret the affair, because it would mean that I would regret ever having my daughters in my life. I wish it could have happened a different way, but I can't regret loving Chelsea, and I can't regret marrying her. Rain listened to what he said, and then sighed. Fair enough. I can understand that, if not respect it. Why not respect it? Sebastian demanded. Do you really want me to answer that question? Yeah, because I don't respect you. Now you understand where I'm coming from, and I understand where you are at. I'm offering civility when we're at these kinds of gatherings. That's all I can offer. Take it or leave it. It will have to do, I guess. I was hoping we could be brothers again, Sebastian told him. Now why don't we go in so you can meet my daughters, and I can meet your wife and kids. Chelsea's heart nearly broke when Rain's eyes showed no emotion toward her. There was no love there, not even hate. All his eyes showed was indifference, and that was the deepest cut of all. If he should hate her, that at least would mean that there were some feelings for her, that she still occupied some place in his heart. Instead, the indifference was almost more than she could bear. Bustling her daughters into her mother-in-law's home, she saw Ruth holding a newborn in her arms, and she recognized Chastel from the wedding picture 9 years ago. She was still beautiful, stunningly so, and her figure showed no sign that she'd borne 4 children. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail. She had very little makeup and was dressed in a pair of blue jeans and a flannel shirt. Next to her stood 3 children, all blonde like their parents and all possessing the same ice-blue eyes. The boy was flanked on either side by his sisters. He and his sisters were dressed much the same as their mother. Each was holding 2 steaming cups of cocoa. Hello, she said. Hello, Chastel replied. The children have something for you. The boy brought her a cup and said, Hello, my name is Hunter. His sisters did the same, identifying themselves as Opal and Jamie as they handed her daughters a cup as well. I'm Chelsea. She offered her free hand to the other woman. Chastel, she replied. And the girls are Tabitha and Zoe. Chastel nodded to them with a smile. For some reason, the blonde woman's gaze gave Chelsea an uncomfortable feeling. It was almost as if she were being sized up for a meal by a very angry animal. You can call me Aunt Chastel or Miss Chastel, she told the girls. And I'm either Aunt Chelsea or Miss Chelsea, she told the other children. Now that's over with. Why don't you 3 go and show your cousins what your Uncle Shannon did to the garage for you? Come on, Jamie said, taking Tabitha's hand. Opal offered her hand to Zoe, who took it, and they disappeared into the kitchen and out the door into the garage. Aren't you going, Hunter? Chastel asked. Hunter shook his head and said, No, ma'am. 2 sisters are bad enough. Add 2 more girls and I don't stand a chance. Chelsea laughed and said, You're smart for your age. Well, why don't you get your Kindle and finish reading that story to your brother? Chastel told him with an understanding smile. indicating where Ruth was putting the infant in his carrier. "Yes, ma'am," the boy said as he grabbed a device from a low table and went over to settle in next to the infant. "Well, why don't we three go and sit in the kitchen and talk?" Ruth suggested. "Sounds good to me," Chaz replied. Chelsea simply nodded her head and followed the other two into the smallish kitchen. Ruth took a seat at the head of the table, and the other two took opposite sides. "I'm really sorry about this, but Sebastian just found out the reason that we weren't invited to Melissa's and Ryan's wedding was because Rain was going to be the best man, and if we were there, you two would understandably so not come." "That's not exactly the whole story," Chastel told her. "We were still willing to come, but Melissa and Ryan didn't want to make us feel uncomfortable. We told her to invite you, but she just didn't want the animosity marring her day." "I can completely understand that," Chelsea told her. "But, for some reason, it's stuck in Bastian's craw. He's insisting on he and Rain bury the hatchet this Thanksgiving. I think he's expecting way too much." "I'll tell you what Kai has told me," Ruth said. "He doesn't want the family to have to choose between brothers. He came up here with the intention of acting civil towards Sebastian. He told me that he doesn't think he could ever forgive him, either one of you, for what was done, but he could be civil for family gatherings." She sighed and said, "That's far more than I ever hoped for." "I know that we handled things wrongly," Chelsea told her. Ruth shook her head and said, "No, you were in the wrong. You handled things poorly, but you crossed a line you should have never crossed and wounded Kai deeply." "Agreed," Chelsea said, looking at Chastel. She just shrugged and said, "What are you looking at me for? I hate that my husband was hurt, but I recognize that what you did molded him into the man he is today, and I love that man with my entire being. My only animosity toward you is that you hurt someone I love. Beyond that, I'm indifferent to whatever crises of conscience you two may be feeling. I'm always glad to visit with my mother-in-law and Shannon and Melissa, and I think my kids should know their cousins. I'm willing to be civil and even friendly, but don't expect much more than civil from Kai. He's the one who was hurt through all of this and is the one who has to decide how close is close enough." Chelsea nodded and sipped her cocoa. "I appreciate that. Again, I'm not trying to push anything onto anyone. I'm trying to stop things from getting any uglier." "I can appreciate that," Chastel told her. "And I do appreciate it. Tom hasn't been much help in all of this up until lately, and that's only after he started to figure out he had another set of grandchildren," Ruth said. "Well, here's hoping for a quiet and uneventful Thanksgiving." Chastel raised her cup and said. "I can drink to that," Chelsea replied. July 2020. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Between Kai and Ryan, they'd actually managed to book 2 cabins next to each other on Lake Barkley for the Independence Day holiday. It helped that this was where Ryan was now a ranger, and Kai had deep pockets. And it had cost a pretty penny and taken almost a year of scheduling, but they did it. Despite COVID-19, they managed to pull it off. Originally, the get-together was just supposed to be for Ryan, Melissa, himself, Chaz, and the triplets. They were going to take Hunter, Jamie, and Opal into the woods for their first time calling the wolf. But the pandemic got in the way and made scheduling difficult. And they'd run into the problem that they couldn't really justify leaving Shannon and his girlfriend out once word got out, and that of course meant inviting Sebastian and family. They did, however, manage to keep the younger kids out of it. So in addition to the triplets, Tabitha and Zoe were the only other kids coming along. Tabitha, being 15 now and as a sullen teenager, was making a big fuss about having to share a room for 10 days with her pest of a sister, Zoe, and her parents. Chastel's parents were keeping Asher, and Ryan's and Melissa's daughter, Maeve, were staying with Kai's dad, Tom. Now they just had to figure out how to keep Sebastian and his family from finding out they were camping with a pack of werewolves and a Witchkin. Shannon, who had figured it all out about the time Melissa joined the pack by way of a planned bite, was helping with that by keeping Sebastian busy with Ryan's bass boat. He had planned to take them nighttime catfishing on the nights of the full moon, promising and hoping for a big haul. And of course, since it was the land between the lakes, that meant that there was already a good cover story for anyone who might think they saw a werewolf. It would only deepen the mystery of the killer dogman who attacked a family and a hunter back in the 80s. Of course, since Ryan and Melissa had been stalking these woods the last few years, the legend was growing again anyhow. Kai, for one, was excited about the vacation in spite of the fact that Sebastian was going to be there. Since that November 6 years ago, Kai and Sebastian had been true to their word. At gatherings like this, they were civil with each other if not warm. Kai and Chastel were simply excited about the kids reaching the age when they could call the wolf. All 3 of them had been nearly bursting with it for the last few months, but hadn't been able to do it yet. Based on his observations over the last month, Kai was positive that they'd be able to do it this weekend. Of course, the kids were excited as well, and had to be warned several times that Uncle Sebastian's family and Shannon's girlfriend couldn't find out. In his business life, it had been a long but productive 6 years for Kai, as his own CGI company was taking lucrative contracts on their own now. In many ways, that little statue on his mantle was worth more than its gold plating. His mother had sold her house and moved into the mother-in-law suite at their place in Dauphin Island. His personal life was good. Kai sometimes wondered if he burned off a lot of bad luck that horrible morning in May. But as his friend Hunter would say, people make their own luck. It had been a long drive up from the Gulf Coast to southwestern Kentucky, and all 3 of his 12-year-olds were getting irritable. 10 hours on the road had taken its toll on all their nerves. Of course, the approaching full moon didn't help with that either. Finally, it was near 5 o'clock Wednesday evening when they pulled into the cabin space. It looked like Ryan and Melissa were already there, and Melissa had dinner cooking on the fire ring. Looking to the right, he could see that both Sebastian's car and Shannon's truck were already in the cabin next to theirs. Getting out of the Escalade, Chaz asked, "Where's Shannon and crew?" Ryan looked at his watch and said, "I'd say right about now. They're scouting the shoreline for good places to fish. Allison and Chelsea are doing some sightseeing and shopping while Shannon and Sebastian are taking out my boat. I can't thank you enough for letting Shannon use it to take Sebastian and family around the lake. You mean to keep Sebastian and Chelsea distracted while you take these cubs out tomorrow for 3 nights? There are only 2 of us and 3 of them. I think we may need a little help," he told his brother-in-law. "That's what we're here for," Melissa said. Then looking up from the grill over the fire, she asked, "Anyone hungry?" "Yeah." Hunter, Jamie, and Opal said in unison. "Good, because I'm making cannonballs, mac and cheese, and baked beans." "That doesn't sound like camp food," Ryan teased the children with a smile. "It is for our camps," Hunter said. "We never do hot dogs and hamburgers." "So I'm told, kiddo," Ryan told his nephew. "That's why I like camping with you guys." He then looked over at Kai and told them, "We took the double in the front room and left you with the double in the bunk room with the kids." "Thanks," Kai replied with a sarcastic smile. "Just doing my duty as an uncle to make things easier on the kids." Kai had no idea how Ryan could keep such an innocent look on his face when making a comment like that. "So what are the plans for tonight?" Melissa asked as she stirred the beans in a pot suspended over the fire. "What time do you expect Shannon and Sebastian and crew back?" "Probably in an hour or so. They didn't take any fishing gear with them. They're only scouting for places." "We should probably save some dinner for them," Chaz suggested. "They stopped at the restaurant before going scouting," I offered, "and they said they'd eat while out. But they were looking forward to breakfast tomorrow. So, why don't we eat, and then get the rods and reels and go down to the bank and drown a few worms afterward? If the others want to join us, they can," Kai suggested. "Not until you and Ryan clean up the dishes." "I cook it, you clean it," Melissa told them. "Sounds fair," Kai answered. "I'll get the water so it can be heating while we eat," Ryan told him, grabbing the water container and heading inside. "Just how are you going to pull this off with 5 people who are not supposed to know?" Chaz asked him, hopefully with as much skill as possible. "This is a major event in my family's life, and for the pack." "I understand," Kai told her. "Trust me, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it goes smoothly. We could have stayed in Alabama and gone to our usual spot," she told him. "I was trying to make it special. The problem is that as much as I hate it, we can't invite Shannon without inviting Sebastian. That would not be living up to our agreement. Your agreement was to act civil at gatherings where you both have to be there," Chaz told him. It was clear that she wasn't happy with the situation. "I'm as unhappy with this as you are," he told her. "But it is what it is. We will just have to do the best we can. You know what the choice will have to be if we screw this up and they discover the truth?" Chaz asked seriously. "I do," he told her. "Let's just hope it doesn't come to that." "We can hope." Sebastian Darrow smiled as his younger brother, Shannon, piloted the boat around Lake Barkley and the little bays in it. With both Barkley and Kentucky Lake, there were plenty of places to fish not only for bass, crappie, and bluegill, but would be excellent for night fishing for catfish. It was going to be a good vacation with all 3 of his siblings and their spouses, or in Shannon's case girlfriend, on the lakes for 10 days. Sebastian was under no illusions. He knew that his brother Rain only tolerated his presence for the sake of keeping peace in the family. In 6 years, he had still been unable to win back Rain's trust, and he wasn't sure that he ever would. But at least Tabitha and Zoe were getting to know their cousins, and that was a good thing. As for Chelsea, Rain still kept her at an arm's length, and he wasn't sure how he felt about that. He hoped that they would eventually become a family again, but that didn't seem to be in the cards either. Chastel was always friendly, but there was something primal and fiercely protective in her eyes when it came to her family. Bastian found that he was far more worried about upsetting her than Rain, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing. He wondered if it was something inside the woman, or if it was a remnant of what he'd done to his brother. Either way, it left him wondering where he stood with Rain. As for Chelsea, he knew that she was hurt by the distance Rain kept her at. Again, she was tolerated, but at the same time treated as something venomous and to be handled carefully. The kids, on the other hand, got along well. Except for Tabitha, that is. She was going through her sullen teenage stage where she was constantly unhappy with her parents, her school, and just her life. Chelsea had tried to have the talk with Tabitha. His daughter had listened to what her mother had to say about using birth control, and that wasn't giving her permission to have sex, but if she did, it was better not to compound one mistake with another. Chelsea had casually looked at her mother and said, "No, I learned from your mistakes." That had crushed his wife, and she'd finally come to Bastion nearly in tears over it. He'd gone to his daughter who'd seemed indifferent and explained how it's best not to throw people's mistakes in their faces because they could come back and bite you. She'd made an offhand remark about how he should take that up with her Uncle Kai. It was then that Bastion had learned someone in the family had spilled the sordid info about how Tabitha had been conceived. Tabitha was threatening to drag the whole family back down that road, and she adamantly refused to say who told her. Her only reply is that everybody in the family knows, and quite a few people outside the family as well. It was then that Sebastian had realized just how much his reputation had taken a hit, not just from friends, but from family as well, especially family, and that included his own daughter. "You okay back there, Bastion?" Shannon asked. "Yeah, why?" "You seem to be thinking deep thoughts," Shannon said. Sebastian pointed to a cove up ahead and said, "Pull in there and let's check that out. It looks like there's a lot of cover." Shannon smiled, turned the boat into the long cove, and began idling along about 10 yards off the bank. "Good eye," Shannon said. He pointed to where there were several trees that had either fallen or been cut into the water. On down just away, he could see where the land sloped down to a sheer drop-off into the water of about 3 feet. He looked at the fish finder and realized that the bottom slowly sloped outward about 15 feet and then dropped off suddenly. "Mark this place on the map for night fishing. That is the perfect place for big cats to hide." Shannon reached for the throttle and Bastion said, "Wait a minute, bruh. What? Can I ask you a question?" "Sure. Just how many people know about what happened back in '05? Bastion asked. "I don't know. I know just about the whole family knows, except for the children, of course. And it's sort of an open secret with Dad's neighbors, and probably a few of Mom's." "Some of the children know," Bastion said. "What I'm trying to figure out is who told Tabitha." Shannon grimaced and said, "Ooh, the worst person to find out." He shook his head and asked, "And what does she say about it?" "She flat out told Chelsea she had no plans to make Chelsea's mistake." "Not good," Shannon told him, shaking his head. "I have no idea who might have said something. Do you think it might have been Chastel or Rain?" "I can almost guarantee you that it wouldn't be either of them," Shannon said. "That's just not how they do things." "Did Tabitha say how she found out?" "She said part of it was the date of our marriage certificate compared to her birthday." Shannon nodded and said, "How does the old saying go? Firstborn children can come at any time. All others take 9 months." "Pretty much. But it's clear she knows something about Rain and Chelsea, and she won't tell me who told her." "Well, I know it wasn't me, and I highly doubt that either Chastel or Kai would have said anything." "How about Mom and Dad?" he asked. "Doubtful, although I wouldn't put it past Grace. But you can take that with the same grain of salt that you would take anything I say about Grace with." Bastion nodded. He knew that Melissa and Shannon held Grace in almost total contempt and only tolerated her because of their dad. Understood. It still doesn't sound like the kind of thing Grace would do. I tend to think it would be someone who either wants to stir shit or who would somehow have something to gain by causing trouble. "I can't help you there, bro. There are several reasons I live so far away from family, and drama is the main one." "Yeah, it seems like I'm the only one of us kids that stay close to Dad and Mom," he told Shannon. "I'm not sure what to tell you. I go where the work is, and we both know that the tri-state area is shit for jobs since Armco became AK Steel, and Ashland Oil moved to Covington." Bastion nodded. Shannon wasn't saying anything he hadn't already heard thousands of times by people who grew up there. Now that AK Steel was shutting down, it was just about over. A lot of nice bedroom communities like Russell and Raceland were deteriorating, either from mismanagement or economic circumstances or a combination of the two. "I understand. But Melissa is way down here in Paducah, you're up in Ohio, and Rain is in Gulf City, and that makes it hard to keep up with each other." Shannon nodded and then stopped the boat. He looked at Bastion and asked, "Just what are you looking for?" "I mean, what else can anybody do to help you feel better about yourself?" "What are you talking about?" Bastion asked. "I mean, you seem to be discontented about something. He looked around at the lake for a moment and then with a smile, continued, "Pardon the pun, you were fishing for something, and I don't know what to tell you." Obviously beyond who spilled the beans to Tabitha. "What is it that you are wanting?" Bastian started to snap back at his little brother, but he knew that would only cause the other man to shut down. He thought about what Shannon had actually asked, and then said, "I don't know. We just don't feel like a family anymore. I'm not sure we ever did. We were, once upon a time." I know. I screwed that up," he said. "Actually, I was going to say, once upon a time, when Dad wasn't messing around. We were a family then." But he decided he wanted something on the side, and it blew up in everybody's face. He stopped and then continued a little more warily. "Cheating doesn't just hurt the person cheated on, it hurts everybody involved, especially the children. It sends mixed signals about how spouses should treat each other. That's one of the reasons I'm taking it slow with Allison. I've been cheated on before and don't like it." "I didn't know that," Bastian said. Shannon took a deep breath and said, "Bastian, you haven't felt that pain. And Kai is right. It's extremely embarrassing, shameful, and emasculating. You don't want to tell anybody. It hurts too much." "I'm sorry," Sebastian said. "I hope you never know what that feels like. But I'm going to say something, and you're not going to like it. But you know deep down it's true. If she'll cheat with you, then she'll cheat on you." Sebastian looked down at the deck of the boat. "Don't you think I don't know that? Don't you think that's something I worry about?" "I didn't know," Shannon said softly. "I'm sorry that you have to feel that way. Do you know what the worst part of it is?" Shannon shook his head. Bastian continued, "I honestly believe that if Rain would take her back, if he would just show the least interest in her, that she'd go back to him in a heartbeat. She's complained that talking to him is like talking to a big gray rock. He answers simply and truthfully, with no emotion, no life. That just about kills her, and knowing that it kills her, kills me." Shannon looked at him and said, "Bruh, that will never happen. Chelsea may or may not ever leave you, but Kai will never take her back. I can't explain to you why, not without insulting your wife and giving away some of Kai's and Chaz's secrets, but know that is one revenge that Kai will never even consider. He'd just as soon cut his own throat before doing that. He treats Chelsea with respect but not affection, and that's probably the way it's always going to be." Bastian nodded and said, "At least he doesn't extend that to Tabitha. He acts like he genuinely likes her and treats her like family. That's because Kai is a good man." Shannon paused momentarily and looked at Bastian as if trying to read his face. Finally, he said, "I can tell you one thing that's holding you back from any kind of closer relationship with Kai." "What? What did you just call him?" Shannon asked. "I don't understand. What is the name of our middle brother?" "Rain. Rain Kai," Sebastian told him. "You still call him Rain. Rain is the guy we grew up with. Rain is the guy who fell in love with his high school sweetheart, and Rain is the guy you killed the day he walked in on you with that high school sweetheart. Once he left Russell, he stopped being Rain. Rain, to him, is dead. He died on that apartment floor. Kai is who he is now. Kai is who the vast majority of the important people in his life know him as. Even Mother calls him Kai. But you, Dad, Grace, and Chelsea insist on calling him Rain. You insist on forcing him back into the person you broke. He's not that guy anymore, and as I've said before, if that fight were to be refought today, it would be you left beaten and bloody on the floor. You mean to get closer to him? All I have to do is change what name I call him? No, you have to respect him. You don't respect Rain. Rain is the guy you beat. Rain is the guy you so emasculated that the only way could you have done more damage would be if you'd assault him there in front of Chelsea to prove your dominance. You own Rain. You destroyed Rain. Kai is his own man, and you haven't beaten him. You must respect Kai as a man who can and will meet you halfway, but only halfway. I'll think about what you've said, he told Shannon. Really, I'll think about it. Shannon smiled and said, take your time. He's not going anywhere anytime soon, and neither are you. It was early Thursday morning as Melissa Lee started rebuilding the fire in the fire ring when Tabitha came outside of the cabin next to theirs. She stretched and yawned and looked around. She had her coal-black hair pulled back into a ponytail and she was wearing shorts, sandals, and a black shirt with the word pink running across it diagonally. Mornin' Tabby, Melissa told her. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Shannon's snores are loud. Melissa grinned at her as she came over to the cookbox and got out a can opener and started helping with the morning prep. Need a hand? Sure, Melissa said. Start by mixing about half that bake mix into one of the bowls. Crack an egg in it and then pour in some milk, about a tablespoon of sugar and a dash of vanilla extract. What are we making? Pancakes, eggs, bacon, ham, sausage, and fried apples. For just camping? She asked suspiciously. Mom usually only does toast, bagels, or cereal. I like to cook on an open fire. So do your uncles. Why not, Dad? Tabi said as she began mixing the ingredients as instructed. Your dad was always more eager to get out on the water than worry about the meal. Sounds about right. Dad always rushes breakfast. He was the same way when we were kids. To him, eating breakfast was a waste of time. He wanted to get the day started. Tabi set about beating the batter, while Melissa finished with the fire and lay the griddle across the ring to get hot. There was a long, uncomfortable silence until Melissa finally put her hands on her hips and asked, "Okay, what's eating you?" Tabi looked at her as if she was gauging how much she could trust this particular adult. Finally, she asked, "What does very near a scumsucker mean?" That caught Melissa off her guard. I guess it depends on how you're using that particular word. If you're meaning something akin to butthole, then it just means you're acting mean and stupid. If you mean by its actual definition, it means someone whose parents got married very shortly before they were born. Most people don't approve of calling children born out of wedlock scumsuckers anymore. A kid has no control over how they were conceived or born. Your Uncle Ryan says that there is no such thing as illegitimate children, only illegitimate parents. I tend to share that sentiment. So, I am very nearly a scumsucker, Tabi said. Unsure how to proceed, Melissa just shook her head. The girl obviously needing some kind of reassurance, but Melissa was unsure what kind. Finally, she asked, "Who called you that?" "It's not important," she said. "I guess it's true." Melissa put down the stick of butter she'd been using to grease the griddle and came over to her niece, put both hands on her shoulders and said, "It doesn't matter what anybody else calls you. You just need to know that you are loved. Your parents love you, your grandparents love you, and your aunts and uncles love you." She grinned and said, "And I know for a fact that Hunter thinks you hung the moon. Hunter's weird. He's having his first crush. On me? Of course. You're pretty, you're smart, and you aren't one of his sisters, and don't torment him. It's not anything inappropriate, but if you watch him when he's around you, you'll notice that he always pays a little more attention to you. I thought he was just being nice." "Oh, he's nice. He's just infatuated with you because he looks up to you. It's still kind of weird." Melissa grinned and said, "That describes most boys. But don't forget what I said. You are a much-loved child. Uncle Kai was very nearly my daddy, wasn't he?" I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that, somebody told me that Uncle Kai and my mother dated all through high school, and then in college." Melissa nodded and proceeded with caution. "First of all, I think you need to be asking these questions to your mother. Second, you don't need to be listening to anyone who would call you very nearly a scumsucker. They don't have your best interest at heart." "What happened?" "What do you mean?" "Mom and Dad won't talk about it. I know that Mom was supposed to marry Uncle Kai, but something happened, and Uncle Kai went away for a long time, and Mother married my dad. Am I really my dad's daughter, or is Uncle Kai really my biological dad? The man in there sleeping with your mother is your dad, both biologically and in every other way that counts," she told her. "Then what happened?" Melissa shook her head and said, "That's a question you're going to have to ask your mom and dad. If I told you that particular story, at least 4 people I know and love would string me up in a tree and use me as a piñata." "So, it's bad?" Tabi asked. "It wasn't a good time for anybody, Tabi. Someone said that since I was conceived in evil and sin, then I would grow up to be evil and sinful. That is not true," Melissa told her. She was shocked that any adult would tell a child something like that. "Now, I want to know who said that. That is completely over the line. You were conceived in love. Don't ever doubt that. Your mother and your dad love you very much, and they loved each other when you were conceived. But I wasn't supposed to be, was I? I think you've put enough facts together to know the answer to that. But before you go blaming yourself for something that wasn't your fault, you need to know that the fact that you were is what brought most of our family back together. Except Uncle Kai," Tabitha pressed. "It took Kai longer than most of the rest to come around." "I really want to know what happened," Tabitha said, "and I would really love to tell you. But that is a story that will have to come from your parents, not from me." "Because they would be mad at you?" "Yes, they would be angry with me. But that's not the reason." "Then what is the reason?" "It's not my story to tell. It's not my place to tell. It's theirs." "Does Uncle Kai hate me for what happened?" "Now that is something I can tell you about. He doesn't hate you. He loves you like he loves all of his other nieces. Kai is just Kai." "Then why does he always hug me from the side, but hugs Zoe from the front?" Tabi asked. "I'll bet if you pay attention, when Zoe gets a little older, he'll be hugging her from the side too." "Why?" she asked. Melissa put her hands under her breasts and sort of jiggled them. Then she nodded to Tabi's already well-developed endowments. Tabi took a minute to think about it and said, "Oh, that's stupid. Like I said, Kai is Kai. He does things his way, and his way is to make sure that nobody can mistake what he says or does for something else. It makes him just seem alone, Tabitha told her. Trust me, he's not alone. Your Aunt Chastel makes sure he never feels neglected or alone. She wiggled her eyebrows. I didn't mean that way, she said. I just mean he always seems sad. He and Dad hardly ever speak, and with Mom it's even less. Again, that's something you'll have to talk to your parents about. They can explain it better than me. Tabby shook her head and told her, I don't think that's going to happen. I really screwed up a few weeks ago. Mom was going on about, not getting pregnant, of taking care of myself, and not being used by some boy. I sort of told her that I didn't make her mistakes. Who? I bet that went over like a lead balloon. Tabby looked down at the ground and said sadly, I made her cry. Then Dad came in and started talking about not throwing people's mistakes in their faces, and I doubled down. What did you say? Melissa asked worriedly. I asked him if that was like he and Uncle Kai. For a second there, I thought he was going to slap me. Your dad would never hit you, Melissa told her. He hit Uncle Kai. Who told you that? The same person who told me that Uncle Kai was supposed to be my dad. And that was? Tabitha shook her head. I don't want to get anybody in trouble or stir up any more crap. Well, I can't make you tell me who it is, but I suggest you talk to your mom and dad. You should probably apologize for what you said to them. You know you were wrong, and I know you were wrong, and so do they. But once you clear the air, you might, and I stress the word might, get some information from them. She paused for a moment and then said, and it's probably going to come back and bite me in the backside. But don't. I repeat, don't. Take this to your Uncle Kai. That's not fair to him. And it would put him in a situation where it would only stress his already difficult relationship with your parents. This is something you need to hear from Sebastian and Chelsea. And don't trust anything anybody who wasn't there says. A lot of that story has gotten twisted over the years and is not correct in any way, shape, or form. Tabitha nodded and said, Thanks, Aunt Missy. She gave Melissa a hug and then went back to helping with breakfast. They talked about other things more appropriate for an aunt and niece, from boys, to music, to movies. After everyone else got up and breakfast was eaten and plans were made for the day, and Kai and Ryan had cleaned up the dishes, Chastel came up to her and said, You handled that situation with Tabitha rather well this morning. You heard that? Ears of a wolf, remember? Who else heard it? The only other person awake was Hunter. I don't know if he heard it or not. If he did, I'm afraid it's going to be a while before he forgives you for telling Tabby he has a crush on her. Oh dear, she replied with a grimace. Chelsea was just glad to get a chance to spend some time with Tabitha that didn't involve arguing, a rare thing these days. It would have been nicer if it had been just the two of them, so they could talk as mother and daughter, but she wasn't complaining, and she really did appreciate getting some time to spend with her nephew and one of her nieces. And it was nice to walk the hiking trails in the late evening when the hot July day was beginning to cool off. As they rounded the bend of a trail not far from a private cemetery, she took a moment to think on the way things had turned out in her life. She couldn't complain about a lack of material things. Sebastian made good money as the news director for one of the local television stations. She pulled down decent money as a kindergarten teacher, and that included very good benefits for both her and her family. The teachers' union in Kentucky was very strong, but she had her regrets, and one of those was the way things turned out between her and Rain. It still hurt that he would not let her get close as a friend, if not more. She knew that Sebastian had seen the hurt in her eyes over that, and she knew that it hurt him to see that. But she just couldn't help but feel that she'd made the wrong choice so many years ago. She and Sebastian had a good life, and were aging with as much grace as a couple with 2 kids on the backside of 30 could. But whereas she had her stretch marks and a few extra pounds, and Sebastian was definitely displaying the dad bod, both Rain and his wife, Chastel looked like they hadn't left their mid-20s. Even having borne twice as many children as Chelsea had, Chastel could still wear a bikini and look smoking hot with no stretch marks, and Rain had a rock-hard six-pack. And there was a wild, almost animalistic beauty to Chastel that Chelsea couldn't reproduce to save her life. That same attractiveness was starting to show up in their children too. Chelsea studied both Hunter and Jamie as they ran ahead of them on the trail. They both had inherited their parents' height and fair coloring. Whereas Jamie had her mother's tawny blonde hair that was giving way to honeyed highlights, Hunter was an ash blonde whose hair was slowly fading to be nearly tow-headed. Both had light-colored eyes. Jamie's were a dark blue and her brother's were ice blue to nearly white. Both children seemed happy and carefree as their senses sought out the natural wonders around them. She smiled to herself when she noticed that Hunter kept looking back at them, and his features would soften. It took her a while to realize that her nephew was a little infatuated with Tabitha. The fact that whenever he would look back to check on them, Tabitha would blush told her that her daughter knew about it and was trying not to hurt his feelings. He turned back around, distracted by a series of low-built concrete structures that were set back off the trail. They were overgrown and were slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Tabitha told her, "Mom, I want to apologize for what I said to you last month. It wasn't fair, and it was mean. I'm sorry." That caught Chelsea off guard. She reached over and took her hand and said, "Thank you for that. I wasn't trying to be hypocritical. I was just trying to warn you from making some of my mistakes." "I know," she said softly, "but I still would like to know about what happened. I want to know why." She paused trying to find the right words. Finally, she asked, "Was I conceived in sin and betrayal, and does that make me sinful and treacherous?" "What?" Chelsea demanded. Then more softly she turned to her daughter and asked, "Who in the hell is filling your head with that kind of nonsense?" If this was the kind of thing she was hearing from people, then there was no wonder that she was sullen and angry lately. Tabitha just shook her head and said, "It's not important." "Yes, it is, Tabby. Nobody should be telling another person something like that, especially not a child." "I'm not a child," Tabitha countered. "Oh, yes you are," Chelsea told her, then stopped and pulled her into a hug as the shadows lengthened into nearly twilight. "You are my child, you are your father's child, and we both love you more than you can ever know." "Am I?" she asked. "Am I my father's child? Someone told me that I wasn't, that Uncle Kai was my biological father." "No, honey, you are your dad's daughter, biologically, and in every other meaningful way." "Okay, that's enough of that. I want to know who is telling you this garbage." "It's not important," Tabitha tried to tell her. "It is important. I don't want my child around someone who would tell her ugly things like that." By now tears were flowing down both their faces. "Please tell me." Tabby nodded and said, "Aunt Michelle?" "My aunt?" Tabitha nodded again. Michelle was Chelsea's mother's sister and was more than a little too fanatical about her religious views. From what she understood from her mother, the woman had a very wild youth and was trying to make up for it in her older years. "Well, I want you to know that Aunt Michelle doesn't know what really happened, why, or how." "Will you tell me?" Chelsea nodded and said, "I'll tell you, but not now. I'll tell you when we have a chance to sit and talk alone like mother and daughter." She looked over at where Hunter and Jamie were paying an awful lot of attention to something they found on the ground. And as it is a story that affects more than one family, she paused again for another minute and added, "And your father and I did some things that we are not proud of." With tears in her eyes, Tabitha nodded and said, "Okay." It was then that Chelsea noted the unusual quiet that had fallen over the forest. No birds were singing, no crickets were calling, and even the wind seemed too still. The only sound she heard in the distance was the whine of a boat's engine on one of the lakes. Suddenly Jamie and Hunter ran up to them. Hunter said, "We'd better be going home." Something had spooked the boy, and Chelsea suddenly felt an overwhelming fear as the stench of something rotting and evil filled the evening air. Somehow the shadows had deepened without her even noticing, and now it was truly twilight. "What is it?" Tabitha asked. "Don't know, but we better go home," Jamie said, nearly whining. As if to punctuate the girl's concern, a huge dark figure with fiery glowing red eyes came charging out of one of the structures. "Go!" Hunter nearly yelled as he pushed Jamie and Tabitha ahead of him. "Run!" With her free hand, she grabbed Jamie and ran, pulling both girls behind her. There was a growl from back there, then a roar, and the sound of an impact. Then out of nowhere, the huge dog-like beast snatched Tabitha from her and disappeared into the woods along the trail. She turned to follow the direction it went with her eyes and saw it loping off into the forest, Tabitha under its arm. "Run!" Hunter was growling from where he'd been slammed into the side of one of the concrete structures. In the fading light, she could have sworn that she saw him start to grow. "No!" He howled at them as the fear she'd felt before became overwhelming. Without thought, she turned and tore off down the hiking trail. She realized that she'd left poor Jamie behind. The girl stood staring at where her brother had been a few moments before. She screamed, "Hunter!" Chelsea stopped for a minute and watched as the little girl suddenly tore off down the trail toward her. She flashed past Chelsea repeating, "Gotta get Mom and Dad." Hunter called the wolf. "Gotta get Mom and Dad." Something took Tabitha. Hunter called the wolf and took off after it. She seemed nearly incoherent as she ran along, repeating those words like a mantra. Again, the fear hit Chelsea, and she turned and followed the girl. She had no idea how long it took for them to tear into the campground where the cabins were. She nearly ran Sebastian over as he came running down the trail. He grabbed her by the arms and demanded, "Where's Tabby? Where's Hunter?" It took them. It took Tabby and ran off into the forest. Then it took Hunter. My baby. By this time, she was incoherent with fear and loss. Force, power, and speed swept Tabitha away from her mother before she even realized what was happening. A powerful arm carried her like a sack of potatoes underneath it, pinning her to the furry body that stank of rotting flesh, musk, wet fur, and something else unpleasant that she could not identify. She struggled and screamed incoherently as the shadows and trees flashed by her at speeds she thought impossible. No amount of pushing, pulling, or straining could overcome the vice-like grip of whatever it was that had grabbed her. Even wriggling and shifting her weight couldn't make the creature put her down. It simply repositioned her back under its massively furry arm as it climbed one of the steeper hills. In the distance, she could hear something howl. The creature stopped for a moment and looked back in the direction from which they had come. She looked up at its face and nearly screamed. It looked like something from a werewolf movie. A huge canine head with a mouth full of far too many teeth and glowing red eyes sat atop a massive set of shoulders. Its waist tapered quickly in a triangle shape to a set of small hips. Looking down, it looked like its knees were on backward. A long bushy tail was held out straight behind it. The creature was definitely male, obscenely so. She screamed again, and the creature took off up the hillside, using its free arm to aid its ascent along the rocky face of the hill. When it reached the top, it looked around until it found a large log. Really, it was the trunk of a tree that had fallen in the wind earlier in the year. With one hand, it picked up the fallen tree trunk and then lay her on the rocky top of the hill before laying the log across her, effectively pinning her under its mass. Then it threw back its head and howled in some kind of primal challenge. Tabitha very nearly peed herself as the howl reverberated through the forest, through the ground, and through her. In the distance, not quite as far as before, an answering howl penetrated the night. The huge beast stalked up and down the ridgeline waiting for its challenger. Tabitha struggled to move the log. When that didn't work, she tried to suck in her stomach and move out from under it, but it was no use. She was good and solidly stuck under the dadgum thing. For some reason, the other wolf did not howl again. Instead, it appeared suddenly out of the night and charged the massive creature, slamming into it, shoulder to gut. The bigger wolf went down, and the white one suddenly leapt on it with a flurry of claw strikes to its face and torso, and one snarling bite at the dark wolf's throat that missed. The bigger creature got its legs under its attacker and kicked it away, slamming it into a nearby tree. As the white werewolf picked itself up from being nearly wrapped around the tree, the bigger one pounced and bore it to the ground. In something that looked like a move out of professional wrestling, it hopped once and turned itself around where it had the smaller werewolf's shoulders pinned under its feet and set off a storm of claws against its opponent's torso. There was a flash of movement from the smaller wolf, and the bigger werewolf rolled off it holding the juncture between its legs. The white wolf rolled to its feet and slung something wet and sloppy toward the bushes. It howled into the night again and charged the bigger wolf. Tabitha had a front row seat at a dogfight like nothing she'd ever be able to imagine. The dark wolf was bigger and stronger, but the white one was fast and fought dirty. At one point, it grabbed the dark werewolf by the tail and spun in place, slinging it down the hill. It threw back its head and howled into the night as the larger beast came crashing up the hill again to tackle it across the waist and slam it into another tree, stunning it. Tabitha had no idea how long they fought back and forth, but the smaller werewolf began to slow, but it refused to give up. The tenacity of the attacker seemed to confuse the bigger werewolf. It was as if this pup refused to stay down, refused to admit defeat. Then she heard a voice call out into the night, and a small glimmer of hope entered her soul. It was her Uncle Kai. Kai was going over the things he thought they might need tonight as the full moon was supposed to rise sometime right after midnight. The biggest thing was going to be keeping his brother and family out of the way while Jamie, Hunter, and Opal went through their first change. Suddenly, Jamie came racing into camp, her features already starting to morph. She slammed into him, babbling, "Gotta get Mom and Dad." Creature took Tabitha. Hunter called the wolf and went after them. "What?" He grabbed his daughter by the shoulders and asked, "Chasdell, come here, quick." He turned back to his daughter, whose features were already starting to deform. Her brows were bushier, her ears were starting to point, and he could see the teeth in her mouth start to elongate. "Tell me what happened," he demanded. Jamie stopped, took a deep breath, and nodded as her features started to return to normal. She looked at her dad and said, "We were on the trail. There were some buildings off the trail in the forest. They smelled funny. Hunter and I stopped to look at them. Suddenly, this creature came charging out of them. It took Tabitha. Hunter called the wolf and disappeared after them, He did what? Are you sure he called the wolf? She nodded and said, uh-huh. He called it completely. Okay, he told her. What did this thing look like? Like a big dog that walked on two legs. It reminded me of a German shepherd. Its tail was huge and bushy. Tail? His wife asked as she came out the front door. Yeah, it had this long tail. That's not a werewolf, Chastel told him. I know, he replied. It sounds like the Gwiner Lance told us about. He looked around and said, you get everyone together. When you can get organized, you and Ryan follow me. Make sure Sebastian and his family stay here. Chastel nodded. He knew she didn't like it, but she was going to do what he asked. Right now, he was more likely to catch up with them than even the wolves in the pack. He was just faster. Handing his daughter off to her, he tore off down the road in the direction from which they'd come. Sebastian was standing at the trailhead with Chelsea. Where are you going? He demanded. He stopped and said, to get our children back. Go back to the cabins and wait. To hell with that, I'm going with you. Kai shook his head and said, at least take Chelsea back and make sure she's safe. Then catch up with me if you can. Kai knew that once he hit the trailhead, there was no way his brother could catch up with him. Sebastian looked at his wife, and then to Kai and nodded. As he turned to take her back to the cabins, Kai took off at full speed. It didn't take him long to find where the attack happened. Hunter's clothes were in tatters on the side of the trail. Evidently, he really had managed to call the wolf. That was going to make this that much harder. By now the twilight had given over to night's embrace, and the woods were dark and foreboding. However, Lance had taught Kai the trick of increasing the number of rods in his eyes to be able to see better in the darkness. Fortunately, there was enough starlight streaming through the forest that he was able to navigate without too much trouble. His only real issue was that he had no depth perception in his one good eye. Right now, his hearing was helping him far more than his sight. In the distance off to his right, he could hear the snarls and barking of a fight. Turning in that direction, he reached a small bay where a creek emptied out into the lake, and across the bay he could see two bipedal canine forms locked in combat. One was a good 7 or 8 feet tall and had dark fur and a long tail. The other was only about 6 feet tall, had almost white fur and no tail. Hunter, he called as he backed up into the woods a bit. Then taking a running start, he leapt across the bay completely unaware of the distance to the far shore. He took a chance. He came down on the bank, just at the water's edge, and thanked the gods that he'd made it. Tearing up the hillside, he came to a clearing where the two canids were battling it out along the ridge. Kai could see bloodstains on Hunter's fur, and it was looking like he was far worse for wear than the creature with whom he was locked in combat. Leave my son alone, he shouted as he launched himself up the hill toward the huge beast. The creature turned to look at him, and Hunter ducked in and raked his claws across its throat, pulling out chunks of skin, viscera, and spraying blood all over himself, his dad, and the creature. Kai delivered a powerful punch to the side of its elongated snout, sending sharp fangs flying into the night. Its head snapped back as it staggered to the side. Then, with one long sweep, it caught Kai and Hunter in an arc that sent them tumbling down the hill in a ball of fur and limbs. Kai managed to stop his roll before hitting the water, but the splash that followed told him that Hunter had not. Up top, he heard Tabitha scream and then the Gwiner howl. Uncle Kai, help me. Kai and Hunter scrambled up to the top of the ridge, only to find both the Gwiner and Tabitha gone. Kai looked around frantically to find some indication of which way they went, but the area had been so torn up by it and Hunter that it was difficult. Hunter, however, sniffed the air as he turned in circles and then took off through the trees again. The underbrush was thick and heavy in spots, and Kai found himself having to go around large patches where it had become entangled in fallen trees. Hunter, however, plowed right through them, his thick fur protecting him from the briars and thorns. Kai had no idea how long the chase went on. At some point, he heard the night air fill with familiar howls and knew that the others had come out looking to rescue the kids too. Two howls he did not recognize, however. It wasn't until Hunter answered them that Kai realized his daughters finally called the wolf and joined the hunt. The land between the Lakes National Recreation Area was 170,000 acres of land. 98,000 of those acres were undeveloped forest land. That's a lot of area to search, even for a pack of werewolves and one very pissed off Witchkin father and uncle. The whole night, the creature had led them on a merry chase back and forth across the 5-mile-wide, 40-mile-long peninsula that stuck out between Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley. They crossed roads, trails, creeks, and ponds as the creature sought safety for itself and its victim. But the pack was relentless and would not give it a moment's rest. The strength of the pack is that while members may tire, other members are willing to keep up the chase while those who need to rest do so. Kai noticed that neither he nor Hunter rested. There was something deep inside Hunter that would not let his son rest while his cousin was in danger. And Kai would be damned if he would let that little girl be hurt. He'd always said that he held no animosity toward her for what her parents had done. And by all the gods above and below, he was going to prove that by getting her back, safe and sound. They were deep in the night, and Kai had no idea how long the chase had gone on or even what time it was when they were forced to leap over a 12-foot livestock fence. Kai landed and heard the sounds of large animals, suddenly panicking at the scent of these many canids hunting. Off in the distance, he heard the stirrings of a herd and passed a small cluster of bison before following Hunter over the next fence a good mile away. Kai noticed that there was a piece of torn black shirt on the top of the fence. The creature was tiring, and Kai was beginning to wonder if it had taken Tabitha for food, because by now it was in a serious energy deficit. It had burned far more calories evading the pack than could be gained from any meal smaller than one of the aforementioned bison. It had to have another reason for taking the girl other than food, and the reason he was beginning to suspect scared the hell out of him. They had to find her before the creature could go to ground and hide with her. It was imperative that they keep up their relentless pursuit. Kai also knew that they were adding to the cryptid tales that were told about this site, and now questioned the hell out of the wisdom of picking it for the triplets' first call. Chastel had every right to be pissed at him. It was the ultimate boneheaded idea he'd ever had, and now he was afraid his niece was going to pay the price for his arrogance and stupidity. Kai was getting a lot of practice judging his leaps as half the pack crossed Kentucky 80 in a single bound in order to get in front of the creature and hopefully surround it. At least 2 truck drivers were going to be telling a fantastic tale when they got to their destination. The Gwiner was smart and wily, and it was everything the pack could do to keep up with it, and not give it respite enough to carry out what Kai feared was its plan for the girl. It was nearly dawn when they managed to pin it against the water of a boat ramp. It couldn't swim with poor Tabitha in its arms, and it couldn't get past the semicircle of snarling werewolves that had it trapped. As false dawn began to glow in the east, the giant beast realized it was trapped. With an almost human shrug, it put the girl down on the asphalt of the boat ramp and began to back into the water, its hands in the air as if it were surrendering. As the werewolves snapped and growled in its direction, the beast disappeared into the inky night where the water and shadows became one. Rain nodded at his wife and indicated they should back up and let him deal with the frightened child. Melissa and Chastel melted back into the shadows. They were soon followed by Jamie and Opal, but Hunter refused to back away. Kai nodded to Ryan, who darted in and cuffed him in the back of the head and dragged him backwards into the shadows. Soon, the only sounds were the occasional sound of a car passing on the road to their left and the soft sobs of his niece. "Tabitha?" he softly called, not wanting to scare the girl any more than she already was. "Uncle Kai?" she answered between sniffles. "It's me, Tabby." Suddenly, she charged in his direction and threw herself into his arms. "Uncle Kai," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Where are we?" Kai looked around and said, "It looks like a boat ramp of some kind." He took out his cell phone and turned on the light feature as the two walked up the sloping ramp to find a sign that read, "Devil's Elbow Boat Ramp and Fishing." "Appropriately named place," he said. "What were those things?" "Which ones?" he asked. "All of them," she replied. "There are tales of a cryptid that haunts this area called a dogman. A friend of mine calls them Gwiners. I think they were those." "How did you find me?" she asked. "How did you get past them? Would you believe I used pepper spray?" He lied. "They have very sensitive noses. At this point, I'll believe anything." He smiled and turned over his phone and dialed his brother's number. He noted that time was 4:22 in the morning. Sebastian answered on the first ring. "I've got her," he said. "She's safe and for the most part sound. She's had the bejesus scared out of her, but otherwise I think she's all right." "What about Hunter?" "He's okay too. Ryan found him and is taking him to the hospital." "Where are you?" "Someplace called Devil's Elbow Boat Ramp. Can someone please come and get us?" "I'll be right there, as soon as I figure out where there is. Don't hang up." He paused for a moment and said to someone, "Google Devil's Elbow Boat Ramp and get me directions from here." He came back onto the line and said, "Chelsea's looking up directions from here." "Good. Who is there with you?" "Allison and Shannon," he said. "Get her to drive one of you. I know you're upset, but it would be best if one of you guys were to come so you can sit in the back seat with her and comfort her. She's had a scare. The other can stay with Zoe." "We've all had a scare," Sebastian said. "Yes, we have," Kai told him. "And Kai?" Sebastian asked. Kai noticed that was the first time his brother had ever called him Kai. "Yeah? No matter what may have happened between us in the past, I want you to know that I'm eternally in your debt for finding my daughter. Have you reported this to the police?" Kai changed the subject. Ryan did to the forest rangers. There are a bunch of them out there combing the woods looking for her. Well, someone needs to let them know she's been found, and we'll be taking her to the hospital in Paducah. What about Hunter? Ryan and Chastel are taking him there now. Why did it take them? I don't know, Kai said. And I don't think I want to know. Me too, bro. Me too. Chelsea and Allison are leaving right now. Can I talk to Tabitha? Sure thing, Kai told her and handed the phone to his niece. There were a lot of tears and snot slinging as the girl spoke to her father. He was sure that none of it made any real sense. It was just hearing each other's voice was soothing. Kai stood a silent watch over the girl until Allison pulled up in Shannon's pickup, and they all piled in and headed toward the hospital. Tabitha sat as close to Sebastian as she could possibly get without crawling into his skin. He knew she was a nervous wreck and jumped at loud noises, and watched the shadows as if that thing was going to come out of nowhere and grab her again for God only knows what. All four of them listened to what the authorities from the Department of Homeland Security were telling them. We've investigated what happened to you last night. All that we can confirm is that there was a pack of very large dogs and more than one human male in the woods. We found blood at the spot where you say your uncle found you. The blood is evidently your cousin's. He was injured while trying to get you back from the man who took you. It wasn't a man, she said tersely. It was a werewolf. The woman just nodded to her and addressed Sebastian. Whatever it was that took your daughter. Her cousin was able to get free and fight him off until your uncle showed up. The man then grabbed you and ran away again in the darkness. Eventually, he chased him until his back was against the lake. Deciding to cut his losses, he put you down and tried to swim away to safety, counting on your uncle's concern for you to give him a chance to get away. From what we can ascertain, he swam to the other side of Kentucky Lake and disappeared into the woods somewhere. Or drowned crossing the lake, and we'll find his body in a few days, the second officer offered. What about all the other werewolves? Tabitha demanded. We can't confirm that there was a pack of. The female agent paused a moment and raised an eyebrow at the word. Werewolves out there. We have found large animal tracks all over the park, but as it is a wooded area of considerable size, that's to be expected. The woman's voice was calm and firm. It was clear that she was humoring his daughter and trying not to belittle her. They were werewolves. The one who took me was big and dark and had a tail. The smaller one that fought with it had nearly white hair and no tail. Miss Darrow, it's not unusual for people who've been through an ordeal like your own to imagine that there is a supernatural element to what happened to them, the younger male agent told her. What did Hunter say? Just that he felt someone big slam into him. The next thing he knew, he was on top of that ridge trying to keep the guy away from you. He remembers less and is less inclined to discuss the matter than you do. It is my opinion that something about those events embarrass him. He has sort of his first crush on Tabitha, his wife volunteered. Mom, Tabitha interjected. There's no need to embarrass him. He's not here, Tabby, so he doesn't have to know. It's weird that my cousin has a crush on me. Not really, the woman said. It's fairly common. And that would explain why he wouldn't want to discuss what happened. So, what are we going to do? Sebastian asked. We're going to try and track down this man who attacked you and put him away for a very long time. As for your hospital expenses, the National Park Service is willing to cover them and therapy for you to help you deal with what is obviously post-traumatic stress. There is at least that, Chelsea said. But if that was a man who took Tabitha, he's huge. We have that in our reports. Perhaps a bodybuilder of some sort, the man said looking at his notes. What can we do? His wife asked. Stay and finish your vacation, the woman suggested. I'm not spending another minute in those woods, Tabitha told him. And there's nothing you can do to make me. Stroking her hair, he said, I'm not going to try and make you. I guess we'll pack up and go home. It's understandable, the woman said. I can't say I wouldn't do the same. She handed him a card and said, this is where your doctor is supposed to send the bill for your daughter's therapy. Sebastian took the card and nodded. Thank you for that at least. We're deeply sorry this has happened to you, the man told them. You have our deepest sympathies. If there isn't anything else, the female agent began. I believe we are due in Taylor, Mississippi in 8 hours. And with that they were gone. So that's it? Tabitha asked Sebastian. I'm somehow crazy? She was nearly in tears. Her dad shook her head and said, No, you're not crazy. Then why the therapist? She asked. Because you've been through a traumatic event, honey. The therapist won't try to convince you that you're crazy. He or she will help you develop coping skills to deal with what happened. Does anybody believe me? Oh, we believe you, sweetheart, her mother told her. We're just as flummoxed about this as you are. Somebody is covering up something. Have you talked to Uncle Kai? She asked. Sebastian nodded and told her. Kai says there was something in the darkness with him, and he was damn sure that what took you and Hunter wasn't human. Beyond that, he has no idea. And Hunter? She asked. He says he doesn't remember anything. Tabitha nodded and asked, "Can we go home now? What do you want to do?" Kai asked Chastel as she paced up and down the floor of the cabin. "I'm not sure," she said, chewing on a nail. "I don't know if the damn thing will come back after somebody else, or if we've scared it off." She looked over at him and said, "We have a responsibility to make sure that thing doesn't hurt anyone else. The last any of us saw it was when it was climbing the bank on the other side of the lake. Did you call Lance?" Kai nodded and said, "Yeah. He says that from what he could find out from the records, the army claims to have killed the one that murdered that family and Hunter back in the 80s. They've got an autopsy report. That's more information than I expected. Lance doesn't like the way the OAI works. He's been left out in the cold one too many times. He uses his own contacts to help when he can. So, what is this one? It's definitely not a werewolf. It had a tail," Kai told her. "Could there be another Gwiner in these hills?" "Anything is possible," she said. "I just had a horrible thought," Kai said. "What?" "Lance once told me about a creature from Navajo legend that his uncle's partner encountered as a youth. It's called a skinwalker, and it's a Native American sorcerer who has gone over to the dark side by killing his family. It kills an animal or a person and takes their skin. It can then shapeshift into that." "What? You think it killed a dogman?" "It's something to consider. If it is the case, from what Tabitha told me of that fight, it may come back gunning for Hunter." "Why?" she asked. "Well, according to Tabitha, and she'll be the first to tell you that she couldn't see all that well, but evidently the white werewolf," he made quotation marks in the air with his fingers, "relieved the bigger one of its manhood." "That's my boy," she said fiercely. "Well, if it is a sorcerer, I suspect he won't be able to regrow lost limbs. That's a pretty specific enhancement on rejuvenation witcheries. That's the kind of thing that will make you an enemy for life." He frowned and said bitterly, "Trust me, I know. How much does Tabitha and Chelsea remember? Their memories are not very good. Most of what Tabitha saw she couldn't connect to Hunter. As far as she's concerned, it was a couple of werewolves. That's good. As for Chelsea, she was so scared that it blanked out her memory almost completely. So, basically, Sebastian and his family now believe in werewolves? Or dogmen," Kai told her. "I sort of suggested that they look up stories about dogmen, especially since this place already has legends about them. So, they're going to believe they got caught out by a dogman pack?" she asked. "I think so. Sebastian has a certain reputation to maintain in order to keep his job. I doubt he's going to risk being thought of as a crackpot in the news business." "What about Allison?" "She just thinks that some kind of pervert tried to drag Tabitha and Hunter off, and that I eventually found them and got them free. For once the OAI is being helpful about covering it up." He smiled and added, "They're doing their whole 'we've got top people working on this' shtick going. It's just enough to frustrate them to the point that they won't be taken seriously. So, we're back to your first question. What do we want to do? I for one think we should pack you, Shannon, Allison, and the kids back to Dauphin Island, and Ryan, Melissa, and I stay and hunt this thing down. Make it clear that our family is not on the menu." "Is that what you think this was about?" she asked. He shook his head and said, "I don't know. It went into a serious energy deficit in taking Tabitha. It should have cut its losses with the fight on the hill and left her. It was after something other than food. Or it's very stupid. Could it be intelligent?" she asked. "I mean, not just a Gwiner, but something with an actual ego and a plan?" "It's possible," he told her. "That could suggest it's the skinwalker we were talking about earlier, or that it's something under the control of someone else. There were plenty of times where it could have escaped without Tabitha, but chose to keep up the chase. And when it did finally release her, it acted nearly human. I think we should maybe go home just as soon as the full moon is gone." She smiled at him and said, "I don't want to take a chance of an accidental shift on the drive home. We'll just have to keep the runs together. Nobody gets too far from the kids," she told him. "When we get home, we talk to Lance about what happened and see if he has any insight." Kai nodded. "Or you could take the kids and Melissa to my dad's place. She can show you several places they could run for a few days. Greenbow, Yatesville, Grayson, and Cave Run offer a lot of places to take them at night. And you and Ryan would be doing what?" "We'd hunt this thing down and make sure it doesn't hurt anyone again." "Just the two of you?" Kai shook his head. "No, the 6 of us." "Huh?" she asked. "I have at least one witchery that can increase our odds." She smiled and blushed deeply. "You hardly ever use that particular witchery except to get more work done. Or in the..." She paused and blushed. "It can be used for things other than work or play. It can be used to take this thing down. I can be my own pack." "I don't know," she said, mulling over the suggestion. "I would feel better with you doing that. It would make sure that you and the kids were safe." "And you? What about you being safe?" Trust me, I plan on being as safe as I can. She pulled him to her and hugged him. I don't know if I can leave you here to face that alone. I won't be alone. I'll have the best help I can possibly have short of my wife, her twin brother. I'm still not comfortable staying with your dad, she told him. Then stay in a hotel. But you need to be somewhere you can get to before moonrise, and you need a base of operations. For today, just drive to the area, rent a hotel room, and then you and Melissa take the kids out. Come home the next day and crash. Wake up, eat, and repeat. I hope to be done here in a day, but if not, 2 days. How do you plan on finding it? Hopefully, it will find us. It expended a great deal of energy yesterday with 0 results. I'm hoping it is desperate tonight. Finally, she nodded and said, okay, but you have to help me get the kids packed and the SUV loaded, and you have to keep your cell phone on you. Which one of us? She chuckled and said, there is that. Just one of you. Then looking around she asked, do you have enough clothes to outfit 3 more of you? There's a Wally World just in town. She sighed and kissed him. He felt it down to his toes, and it made him wish they had a bit more privacy and time to make things happen. But there were other important issues at hand, so he would just have to take that as a down payment for later. Finally, she stepped back and said, Hunter's embarrassed. About? Ryan having to cuff him, she said with a smile. He was very invested in taking down whatever that thing was. Kai just smiled. I think it hurt his pride. No, I think it took something he values, she told him. Oh, Kai said, finally understanding. That would explain several things last night. He smiled and asked, just how exhausted is he today? He's dragging big time, she told him with a smile. How are the girls doing? Oh, they're pleased as punch, she told him. But they do keep looking at him with just a bit of wariness in their eyes. Oh, yeah. He called the wolf first, and then rode it all night. The wolf didn't ride him. And it did them? She nodded and said, for the first few full moons, usually a year's worth, a lycanthrope has problems controlling the wolf. It's a whole bunch of new emotions pouring into them at the same time as puberty. It's a time when a lot of lycanthropes get into trouble. Last night, the wolf was in control of the girls. That was why I wanted a pack around them. The wolf might control the shifter, but the pack controls the wolf. Hunter, however, did not lose control. The wolf did everything he told it to and more. It's a very good sign. I'd say so, he said. Have you talked about it with him? I had Ryan do it. It's sort of a guy thing when this happens. Very few she-wolves can ride the wolf the first night. It takes us longer. Usually, a male who does it ends up as a very strong pack leader. He shrugged and said, see, we've been married 13 years and I'm still learning. She just shook her head and kissed him. Not all Witchkin can run with a pack. You not only run with it, but you also occasionally take control of it. No wonder your son can ride the wolf. So, what are you guys going to do? Chelsea asked Chastel as she and Sebastian packed up their things and loaded them into the back of their SUV. She noticed that Tabitha kept looking at the woods in dread. The kids and I are moving to a hotel for a few days while Kai and Ryan try to find out more about it. Kai wants to explore the local legends. He thinks it might make a good short flick. I don't think I could handle that. That's why the kids and I are going to stay in the hotel. Maybe some room service, sometime by the pool, that sort of thing, Chastel replied. Then noticing where Tabitha was standing hugging her arms, she asked, how's she doing? She says she doesn't want to go back into the woods. I think that she's going to need some therapy before we ever go camping again. Chastel nodded to where Hunter came up to Tabitha and asked quietly, are you okay? She smiled down at her cousin and said, yeah, thanks to you and your dad. I'm still confused about a lot of what happened last night. What I saw and what I'm told I saw are 2 different things. He smiled at her and said, I don't remember much of it. I remember getting hit and trying to get away. That's all. The next thing I know, Uncle Ryan is taking me to the hospital and I'm feeling really embarrassed. Why were you embarrassed? She asked. I just was. She smiled, leaned down and kissed the top of his head. It's okay, Hunter. You're the best cousin a girl could ask for. He nodded as he blushed deeply. He then smiled and said, thank you. You're a good cousin too. And I'm sorry all this crap happened to you. We're going home today. I thought you might, he told her. We're going to a hotel for a few days with Mom and Aunt Melissa. Dad thinks this might make a good movie, and he says he's got a few voice actors who owe him a favor. He's staying to research the local legends. I don't know how I feel about the idea of what happened being made into a movie. Hunter chuckled and said, don't worry about it. When Dad is finished, I doubt that much in the story will be the same. He gets inspired and goes crazy. Well, you guys be careful. I would hate to find out my 3 favorite cousins are werewolves. Hunter did a double take and then looked down at the ground. Yeah, I guess that might be a bad thing. Not if it was like the white one I saw last night. He was pretty cool. You don't expect to see a white werewolf. Most people don't expect to see a werewolf, Hunter told her. You have a point, she replied and hugged him. We'll see you guys at Thanksgiving? I think it's Christmas this year. We did Thanksgiving with you guys last year. It sucks when family is so far away, she said. Yeah. Chelsea and Chasdell looked at each other and smiled. It didn't look like things were going to get weird for the kids. Both women were glad for that. That at least ended well, Chas said. How's Rain today? He must be nearly dead on his feet. He's tired. He says that when he gets home, he's going to need another vacation to rest up from this one. I can't thank him, both of you, enough for what you did. That's not necessary, Chastel told the woman. Kai does what Kai does, and he does it for his own reasons. He loves both his nieces to pieces. I always wondered about that, Chelsea said. I'm not so sure I could in his place. Chaz looked at her and said, Don't misunderstand. Kai is still hurt very deeply, but he won't take that out on your kids. If anything, he'll put himself into danger to prove that he won't do that. I know, Chelsea said. Like you said, he does what he does. Once upon a time I forgot that, and he paid too high a price for it. As long as we understand each other, Chaz told her. I get the feeling that Sebastian has been pushing Kai for a closer relationship lately. I'm afraid he's going to push him completely away. Chelsea nodded and said, I'll try to talk to him. The problem is that Sebastian thinks that since it's been 15 years, Rain should have forgiven him by now. He doesn't understand that some things are not forgivable. Chaz just frowned and nodded her head toward Tabitha. How are you planning on handling the questions she's starting to ask? Chelsea sighed and said, That's actually more difficult. I have an aunt who is pushing some agenda and is filling her head with nonsense. Half of it isn't true, and the other half is delivered to have the hardest impact on her as possible. I think Sebastian and I are going to have to sit her down and tell her the whole story. She asked if Rain was her biological father. I know, Chaz said. Sometimes these things are harder on the children than on the people involved. Chelsea shook her head and said, Not this. I don't think there is any way to have made it harder on Rain. I know. Are you going to help in here? Or are you going to make me do all the packing? Sebastian called from inside the cabin. Be there in a second, Bastian, she called. Then turning back to Chaz, she said, I'd better get moving. It's still a 5-hour drive back to Worthington. Take care. You too, Chastel said, turning to collect Hunter. Kai put down the 3 bags he and Ryan had brought with them. Looking around, he checked his phone and realized that the moon was set to rise in about 10 minutes. He looked over to his brother-in-law and nodded before he stripped bare, even removing his wedding ring. When he was ready, he closed his eyes and reached inside himself and found his center. He found that black flame that the shadowy figure had placed inside his chest. He focused on that flame as it flickered in his soul. He fed it his emotions, he fed it his attention, and he fed it his will. At first, nothing happened, but in a few seconds, it began to burn hotter and grow in size. With a great deal of concentration, he pushed part of that flame out of his soul. He felt his body begin to throb with power as the flame pulled a second body from him, and a link was established between them. The other him went over to one of the bags and began to dress. Kai had found out that he had to be completely nude to be able to pull off this feat. The first time he tried it and his clothes were ripped to shreds, and he found him and his doppelganger unable to completely separate because the ring on his finger prevented that finger from releasing. He'd been forced to reabsorb the clone, remove the ring, and do it again. Thrice more, he forced the birth of a doppelganger, and each of them began to dress in silence. There was no need to communicate as each knew what the other was thinking. When they were dressed, he turned to where Ryan was standing in awe and said, Now we wait for it. I've never seen you do that before. Very few people have. Hunter Dare and your sister, and now you are it, he told his brother-in-law. He smiled and one of his doppelgangers added, How do you think I'm able to get so much accomplished in a short amount of time? I nearly always come in under budget and early. I thought through a lot of hard work. They all smiled, and he said, It was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of hard work times 5. So, what are the limitations here? Ryan asked. Only that we can create 4 extra versions of us, and we all have the exact same characteristics, skills, and witcheries as number 1, except none of us can create more of us. So, you're all just as strong, just as fast, and can shapeshift? Kai and his 3 clones all nodded in unison. We can also communicate back and forth without words. We feel what is happening to each other and know what we're going to say without saying it. It's not so much telepathy as real-time shared experience. So if one of you gets hurt, the others feel it. Feel it, but don't share the damage, only the pain. That must suck, Ryan said. It's not fun, but we also share in each other's pleasure and accomplishments as well, so it all balances out in the end. Ryan looked around and then up at the moon as he too began to strip, putting his clothing in the large gym bag he'd brought. He stashed it under a stump and proceeded to piss on the opposite side of the stump. Then looking over at Kai and his doppelgangers, he blushed and said, "This way I can find the right stump." Then his body began to pulse and spasm. Kai could see the bones under Ryan's skin begin to move around and reshape themselves. Honey blonde fur began to sprout on his body as his head reshaped itself into something more canid. After several seconds, Ryan had been subsumed into the wolf. He looked over at the four Kais and chuffed in amusement. And so, they spread out and disappeared. 6 ghosts stalked the darkness, 5 as a man, and 1 as a man-wolf. Kai number 2 was making his way through the forest just south of Golden Pond when he heard a howl. It was deep and it rumbled through the forest like an old freight train. He could literally feel the ground vibrate under him as he looked around startled. It was close. Slowing down, he dove into his senses. The darkness lifted as he modified his eyes to add more rods, and to generate a tapetum behind his retina to act as a retroreflector, increasing his ability to see in low light. With the moon out in full, he could see almost as well as he could on an overcast day. He shifted his ears slightly to increase his auditory fidelity and increased the scent receptors in his nose. The world blazed alive for him as he heard the steady rustling of leaves to the south of him. He stopped and turned slowly, sweeping the forest with his new senses. The rustling stopped when he faced the south. As he came around to face the north, he heard it pick up again. Looking up, he could see in the canopy of the trees above him several branches that should hold his weight. Picking one, he crouched down and leapt straight up to the limb. He then scrambled a bit further up the tree and stood on it as he watched the ground below. In just a few moments, he could see the massive form that he and the pack had been chasing the night before entering the clearing. With a smile, he noted in the distance that as it was tracking number 2, number 1 and Ryan were tracking it. He didn't need to call for help. The others already knew where he was and what he was doing. Only Ryan wasn't fully aware of what was about to happen. Gritting his teeth hard, he stepped off the limb to drop directly onto the monster. At the last moment, he screamed defiantly, and as the creature looked up, it got a face full of steel-toed work boot as he slammed into it with all his mass. Kai wasn't a small man, and he was big enough, and the force he generated by hitting it at about 35 feet per second bore both to the ground. Suddenly, he felt a searing hot slash of pain across his side as the creature twisted with the fall and raked 4 sharp claws across his side with enough force to slice deep into his skin and viscera and slam him across the small clearing into the trunk of another nearby poplar tree. He saw stars from the force of his head hitting the tree. Shaking the stars out of his head, he knew the others were feeling the same pain as he was, but he also knew that they were plowing through it as they advanced on the behemoth before him. A howl echoed off the hills and lake as the huge blonde form of Ryan in his war form sprang from the shadows and bore the creature to the ground. The sounds of ripping and tearing flesh, mixed with the unmistakable canine snarling, growls, and snaps of a dogfight as the two forms rolled across the leaf-strewn ground, filled the air. Number 2 looked at his arms and willed them to reform into the razor-sharp claws and fur of a big cat, and then dashed into the fray swinging. He felt his claws bite hard and drink deep from the creature's sides as he picked it up over his head, and then like an athlete hurled its form into a nearby sycamore tree. Crack! The tree rocked and swayed for a moment before it toppled over and came to rest leaning against the canopy and branches of the trees behind it. The creature rolled slowly to its feet and shook its head from the force of the impact. Next to him, Ryan growled through a snout full of hair and flesh he'd ripped from the monster's hide. Suddenly, it launched itself sideways at number 2. It swept him up and slammed him into another nearby tree with enough force to crack the trunk. But the creature did not move from him. It pressed its bulk up against it, bit deep into the juncture of his neck, as it raked its claws from his chest to his hips, stripping away the flesh and exposing the bone and organs underneath. Kai had no idea what would happen if one of his doppelgangers died. He leaped into action and yanked the great beast off number 2, hurling it backward toward Ryan and numbers 3, 4, and 1. He reached out and touched number 2's bare face. Both of their clothes were ripped to shreds as he absorbed the clone into his own body. He had felt number 2's pain from the attack, but now he was taking on its injuries as well. He staggered into the tree as he felt himself slowly heal the damage from the clone. He shook his head to fight back the pain as he watched Ryan faint to one side with a slash, and when the beast tried to dodge it, he lashed forward with his snout and bit deeply into the side of the beast's neck, shook his head and pulled away with a mouth full of muscle and fur. Great gouts of blood erupted from the wound, staining Ryan's fur. The beast reached across its body and grabbed the blonde werewolf by the arm and slung him into where number 1 was charging it. The werewolf and the clone went down in a jumble of claws and limbs. However, while it was distracted, number 3 stepped in from behind the tree. In mid-thrust, the clone's forearm and hand were transformed into a chitinous spear like a scorpion stinger. The sharp end of the stinger penetrated its hide and began to pump venom deep into its body. Number 3 danced back out of the way as the creature looked down at the deep hole in its side. Kai knew that wasn't scorpion venom, but that of a black mamba. It was something he'd been researching off and on for the past few years, and with the help of both Hunter Dare and Lance McKnight had managed to study not only the physiology of the scorpion but the chemical composition of the snake's venom. The creature looked at him and growled before lunging forward, trying to rake him in close to deliver a fatal bite. This time, he ducked under the larger creature's arms and delivered another sting just under the armpit before spinning out of the way. Kai knew what the plan was. Keep it moving, keep it fighting. The venom would spread faster with the exertion. Fighting the pain he was feeling from absorbing number 2, he stood and shook his head. He waited and watched as Ryan and number 4 were back in action, stalking it. Having run with the pack for so many years, Kai understood its tactics. 1 or 2 of them would snarl and dash in for a strike, and while the monster wolf was distracted, the other members of the pack would strike from the flank or from behind. He waited, he watched, and when Ryan and number 4 attacked it from 2 sides, Kai leaped atop the creature's shoulders, straddling its neck. He wrapped his lower legs under its arms and linked his ankles at its back. This required a bit of a stretch of his own shape-shifting abilities to lock down, but he managed it. Then, he reached down and grabbed the creature under its lower jaw and began to heave backward, pulling its head up and to the side. When he had its neck bared, the blonde werewolf dashed in and ripped out its throat, forcing more blood to sprout everywhere. As the creature staggered forward, Kai rolled off its shoulders and came up fast but failed to avoid the slash to his back the creature managed to hit him with. It burned like fire, and he watched numbers 1, 3, and 4 wince in pain. But the venom was already starting to take effect. Even in the low light, he could see its black pupils constrict down to tiny pinpricks as its eyes became nearly entirely red. It was starting to gasp for breath as the hole in its throat tried to suck in more air. Ryan launched a frontal assault again, feinting another attack on its right, while number 4 stepped in close on the other side and delivered a powerful punch to its floating ribs. Kai could hear the bones crack, and the creature winced in pain as it lost a lung. Soon, it became just a matter of keeping it on its feet, keeping it moving. One pack member would feint in and distract it, while another would deliver an attack from its opposite side. The more they fought, the more the creature staggered, the less control it had over its limbs as the venom did its work. It was already shutting down its respiratory system, and pretty soon, its cardiovascular system would go, and then brain death. By the end of the fight, Kai almost pitted the monster. It never really stood a chance against the combined efforts of the various Kais and Ryan. In the end, it collapsed to the ground, unable to breathe, unable to move. For long moments, the only thing they heard in the night was the sound of it struggling to get its breath. Finally, it just stopped breathing. Much to Kai's surprise, its body suddenly began to burn of its own volition. Within a matter of moments, the only thing left was the very clear outline of the creature scorched onto the ground and the horrid stench of sulfur burning. Kai waited for the other 2 clones to strip, and then he absorbed them. Then he donned one of their sets of clothes, grabbed the other set, and handed them to Ryan. The large blonde werewolf snorted at him. He understood. This was the second night of the full moon. He had some running to do. With a wolfish grin, he disappeared into the night to chase some deer. Kai halfway expected that one of the bison or elk was going to go missing this evening. As for Kai, he limped back to the cabin, feeling much more the worse for wear from his activities tonight. The legend of the beast of land between the lakes was further reinforced. His kids were safe, and it hadn't been that bad of a vacation. Still, he and Ryan remained at the camp until the moon had disappeared on the horizon on the 3rd day. They cleaned up things and hitched Ryan's boat to his pickup. It was late in the afternoon when they were ready to hit the road, and Chaz and Melissa returned to the campsite. They told him of their 2-night run at Grayson Lake, and he informed his wife that the creature was gone. It wouldn't be until they were all home that he would tell her all the tale, little wolf ears being what they were after all. 2 days later, while Zoe was visiting with her grandpa Tom, Sebastian sat down with his wife and his daughter and said, "We need to talk." "About?" Tabitha asked. Your mother and your aunt have told me that you've been getting some very wrong information from people who were not involved in the events you're asking about." He looked over to his wife, who smiled and nodded for him to continue. "It's not something that either one of us is proud of, but I will tell you what I told your Uncle Kai. I regret more than I can ever express how we hurt him, but I cannot regret that our actions gave us you. So, Aunt Michelle was right. I was conceived in sin and betrayal." "I wouldn't go that far," Chelsea said. "And you are not sinful or treacherous because of it. The fact that nobody, including your Uncle Rain, wanted you to pay for what we did, is what brought our family back together after being shattered by our actions. Go on." Sebastian took a deep breath and said, "Your mother and your Uncle Kai had been sweethearts since 10th grade in high school. It was always understood that they would get married when they finished college. Your mother went locally to Moorhead, but your Uncle Kai got a scholarship to the University of Florida that he couldn't turn down. That meant that we had to have a long-distance relationship, and it worked for nearly 4 years, Chelsea said. It was then that your Grandpa Tom and Grandma Ruth got a divorce, and your Grandpa Tom married Grace. That caused problems with the family. Your father realized that I was sort of adrift in all of this, and needed a friend to help me not lose faith in your Uncle Kai, who went by his first name. Rain, then? That's why you call him Rain all the time?" Tabitha asked. Chelsea nodded and looked at him, and then back to their daughter. "It was Rain who I fell in love with." Sebastian crushed the hurt and jealousy that he still felt to this day when she acknowledged that. "I was worried that your mom might get lonely, that she might forget she was supposed to marry my brother because she only saw him on school breaks and in the summer. What I never meant to do, what neither of us meant to happen, was for us to fall in love. But we did," Chelsea said. "And we went from being friends to being lovers. And we made the mistake that a lot of couples make. We didn't always take the kinds of precautions that we should have, and you were conceived. Now don't think that you are a mistake or that we regret having you in any way. Only that our actions hurt your uncle. You cheated." She looked at her mother. "You were supposed to be faithful to one man, and you slept with his brother." Then looking at her father, she said, "And you were supposed to look out for your brother. You slept with his girlfriend." Those words coming from his own daughter, the tone of disappointment in her voice sawed through his heart like a rusty knife. It hurt far worse than when other people said it, because it meant that he was diminished in his daughter's eyes. He nodded and said, "We cheated. When your uncle found out, he found out in the most traumatizing way possible. He walked in on you." It was a statement, not a question. Sebastian nodded. "When he did, we fought. I mean, really fought. We were both trying to seriously hurt the other one. I was bigger, I was older, and I had a little more experience than he did. I didn't just beat him. I hurt him so badly that he lost sight in one of his eyes. I broke his arm, his ribs, and did some serious internal injuries." "How could you?" she demanded of him. "You not only hurt his heart, but you also hurt him too." There were tears in all 3 sets of eyes. Having to explain all of this to his daughter was nearly killing Sebastian. "I did. He disappeared out of your mother's apartment. It took a whole day to find him, and when we did, he was almost dead. When he finally regained consciousness in the hospital, he refused to talk to anybody in the family. Not even Grandma Ruth? Not even her," he told her. "He was so ashamed at what we'd done to him that he couldn't face anybody who knew. And by that time, everybody knew." "Why was he ashamed?" she asked. "He didn't do anything wrong." Sebastian sighed again and said, "It's something I hope you never have to find out about. Part of it is feeling like a fool for loving someone who didn't love you enough not to cheat. Part of it is part and parcel of what it means to be a man. It's something very primal, and it's hard to explain. What I did to him made him less of a man to everyone who knew. It's a horrible thing to do to any man, and unbelievably so to do it to your brother. So when your uncle got out of the hospital, he disappeared. He wouldn't talk to anybody. He changed his number, his address, and everything. He refused to talk to anybody for several years. But he came back?" "Not really," Sebastian said. "Your Aunt Melissa and Uncle Shannon went looking for him and found a newspaper clipping about his wedding and got in touch with your Aunt Chastel. Even then, he didn't want to talk to us, but he didn't want to tell his wife who she couldn't be friends with. It took 6 years before he would even speak to me and your mom. But you're friends now?" she asked hopefully. "He forgave you, didn't he?" Sebastian shook his head. "No, not really. What I did was unforgivable. He tolerates us because he loves you and Zoe. He doesn't want there to be any hard feelings between you and him or with your cousins. He doesn't want there to be a rift in the family. So he treats me with the same respect I treat him with, and we are able to function as a family. So why did Aunt Michelle call me very nearly a scumsucker? Because you were conceived out of wedlock, not that you were born as such. And to be honest, if there is any shame to that, it is mine and your mom's shame to bear, not yours." Tabitha leaned in and hugged first Sebastian and then her mother. Thank you for telling me. It's going to take some time to figure it all out, but at least I know now. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.